is try click and collect. Just go to tesco.com, order your shopping, then click and collect. With the minimum basket spend now only £25. And if you fancy something a little more exotic, we can even put our pad thai in your cash. Try click and collect at tesco.com. Every little helps. Selected larger stores. Booking charge may apply. See online for full terms and conditions.
Oh, I found one of our new Vauxhall Griffin editions.
Yes. What comes as standard?
Standard? Well, alloy wheels, sat-nav, aircon, DAB radio, Bluetooth, smartphone projection and USB connection.
Wow. Is that everything?
Sorry, forgot the colour touchscreen.
Buy a new Griffin edition, Adam, Astra, Corsa or Mocha X Plus and get a whole host of features as standard. The Griffin edition range. All Griffin, no bull. Visit your nearest retailer now. Vauxhall. British brand since 1903. Participating retailers only. Limited units while stocks last.
This one shouldn't take long. Of course, if it had a cover, I might not be bothered. Can't see what's under there. And then they'd have chained the back wheel. It would have taken me much longer, especially if the chain's off the ground. Makes it harder to cut. This one doesn't even have a lock on the front. So, in the time I've been talking to you, I've nicked it.
Over 9,000 scooters and motorbikes were stolen in London last year. Lock your bike, chain the rear wheel and cover it to make it harder to steal. Lock, chain, cover. The Met Police.
Casa Bacardi is back, bringing a party with an unmissable lineup and tasty rum cocktails to London. With Bacardi's new Sound of Rum crew, featuring live sets from One Asen and P Money, MCing from Harry Pinero and loads more. The perfect recipe for an epic night out. Casa Bacardi at Box Park Croydon on September 14th. For more info and to get your tickets now, head to boxpark.co.uk. Do what moves you. Over 18s only. Drink aware for the facts.
Strings and things. Strings and things. Strings and things. Strings and things. Strings and things and strings, strings, strings and things. Strings, strings, strings and things. Strings, strings, strings and things. Strings and
Now there's a whole range of strings and things called strings and things, including cheese strings, yollies, and new cheese shapes. Find them all in the cheese and yogurt aisle.
strings and things.
I didn't choose you. You chose me. When you broke from the crowd and pawed at my knee, soon you'll be feeling right at home. You'll be a bit unsure, but you're free to roam. What's good to chew? What's nice to nibble? Wet food, dry food, tin food, kibble? You might sometimes be cheeky, not always wise, but I know I found love in those puppy dog eyes. Join the free VIP Puppy Club from Pets at Home for advice and exclusive offers, including 10% off your first shop in store. Visit petsathome.com/puppy club or join in store. T's and C's apply.
Make sure you're uni ready with our huge range of practical essentials and home from home comforts and get 10% off for a limited time. T's and C's and exclusions apply. Dunelm, the home of homes.
With a welcome bonus from the no annual fee British Airways American Express credit card, your next getaway's not far away. So whether it's welcome to drifting down the canals of Amsterdam or bienvenue to midnight strolls in Paris, say welcome to a European adventure. Spend £1,000 in your first 3 months of card membership and get 5,000 bonus Avios. That's enough to get away to Europe sooner. Search BA Amex to find out more. Representative 22.9% APR variable. Applicants must be 18 years or older, subject to approval. Terms, taxes, fees and carrier charges apply.
Welcome to Straight Signs. I'm Joanna Versace and these are your headlines. Europe joins the rally as the Stock 600 hits its highest level since August the 1st amid expectations of high-level trade talks between the US and China next month. Chip makers and autos lead gains as trade-sensitive sectors welcome the apparent easing of tensions, as China's Commerce Ministry says the US trade call this morning went very well. Sterling retreats from its biggest one-day gain in more than 5 months as the threat of a UK election still looms, despite the government's double defeat in the House of Commons.
48 hours ago, he was leading the chants of stop the coup, let the people vote. Now he's saying stop the election and stop the people from voting.
2-year Treasury yields hit their lowest level since 2017, while Goldman Sachs CFO Stephen Scherr tells CNBC exclusively a recession could be on the horizon.
The bond market is reflecting a sentiment that there is anxiety about the prospect of a recession, though again in the U.S., less evident in the data, perhaps more evident in a variety of different markets like Germany here in Europe, but it's possible.
Well, markets Markets are trading a lot more buoyantly overnight, especially on that news that the two sides, China and the US, are reportedly going to have a meeting in October. So that's given a bit of a relief rally to Asian markets and also to US futures as well as we're heading into this European session. You can see there is quite a lot of green on the board already for the Stoxx 600 after that better session yesterday. So that has been the focus for global markets, and we'll get into that story a little bit further. You can see the Stoxx 600 is up 0.4%. But one market in particular I want to talk about is the UK. So let's switch over and talk about individual bourses here. The FTSE 100 is trading on the back foot, down 0.4 percentage points. We had yet another crucial day for UK politics yesterday, with the government getting defeated twice in the House of Commons. The first time to put forward the no-deal Brexit bill that seems like it's on track to be passed by the House of Lords by the end of this week. That would put an end to the possibility of a no-deal Brexit on October the 31st if this government stays in place. And then the second, of course, was the Prime Minister was calling for a snap election, also got defeated on that point. But we are seeing FTSE 100 trade a little bit heavy, even though the pound has rallied. We've rallied almost 3 points in the last couple of days, trading north of 122. So keep an eye on that. Xetra DAX German index up 0.6 percentage point, despite some weaker industrial orders. We had down 2.7% month on month. Again, this is another data point showing that the manufacturing sector in Germany is coming under pressure. CAC 40 also about 2/3 percentage point higher. Some positive names there. Safran, the engine maker, is right at the top of the CAC 40. And then the Italian index, we spent a lot of time discussing Italian politics over the last week. We finally have composition of the government, and investors yesterday were quite relieved to find out that a PD lawmaker, Roberto Gualtieri, will be taking over the finance ministry. He is a Brussels-friendly face, and there is hope in the market that the relations between the two will start to improve. So the Italian index is up 0.3 percentage point. Let's talk about sectors. So a couple of things going on here, but the main story, as I mentioned, was that to do with the potential positive steps between China and the US. So we are seeing some of the export sensitive sectors in Europe respond well. Chip makers and technology baskets up 1.8%. Autos also recovering nicely, up 1.6%. Industrials too. So really, any one of the sectors that has exposure to trade is doing quite well. And then we've got defensives on the downside. Utilities down 0.5 percentage point. Real estate down about 0.4 percentage point as well. But all in all, a better picture for European equities. And as I mentioned, the top story is that Chinese officials have agreed to hold high-level trade talks with U.S. counterparts next month, according to China's Commerce Ministry. Now, Beijing says a meeting has been scheduled for early October following a phone conversation between Vice Premier Liu He, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, and U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer. A U.S. trade spokesperson confirmed to CNBC that a phone call between both sides did take place, but did not confirm next month's meeting. Eunice Yoon has more from Beijing.
The Chinese Commerce Ministry announced today that U.S. and China trade negotiators will resume their talks in early October. Both governments have confirmed that Vice Premier Liu He held a phone conversation this morning with his U.S. counterparts, Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. Both agreed to meet face-to-face in Washington as planned. Working-level teams will consult each other in mid-September to lay the groundwork for the high-level conversations. The Chinese have indicated that they are approaching these talks with caution. The U.S. imposed tariffs this weekend and plans more later this year, including on October 1st, the 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. Beijing wants all the additional tariffs lifted. The Commerce Ministry said that the two sides agreed to work together to create favorable conditions for negotiations, though it's still unclear if these talks will lead to a breakthrough for a trade deal. Eunice Yoon, CNBC Business News, Beijing.
And the other top story here in Europe, Boris Johnson isn't giving up on a snap election despite a defeat in the House of Commons. The Prime Minister will today say the Labour leader's refusal to get behind a vote is, quote, a cowardly insult to democracy. It certainly has been a wild ride for the pound over the last couple of days. This is where we're trading at now, 122.60. You may remember just 2 days ago, we traded shy of that 120 level at around 119.80. Have recovered almost 3 full points in the pound now as the market cheers on the fact that we're less likely to see a no-deal Brexit come October 31st, but still lots of different moving parts up in the air. As ever, Willem joins us with more live from Westminster. And Willem, there was an attempt to filibuster the bill at the House of Lords. That got rejected overnight as well. It looks as though we may see a completion of this bill, the passage to the House of Lords by tomorrow afternoon. But I believe you have a guest with you who can give us a little bit more color.
Certainly some more detail. Yes, that's right. I'm joined by a member of the House of Lords, Robert Hayward. And I want to ask you, we've got 2 more days of legislation in the upper chamber, in the House of Lords, over this effort to try and block a no-deal Brexit at the end of October. Is there any chance that will run into major obstacles as far as you're concerned?
No, the agreement's been done. It was completed at 1:30 this morning, and we will now deliver that bill back to the Commons with effect from Friday afternoon.
Just for viewers watching this, both in the UK and across Europe, maybe even the US at this time of the morning, how unusual was the contraction of the timetable that we saw agreed yesterday in terms of the way that the House of Lords normally deliberates over this kind of legislation?
We do the revisions and the review of legislation, and that takes time. And therefore, what was happening yesterday was extraordinary. We're in extraordinary times, and we probably will be for the next few days.
Let's talk about what those extraordinary times could lead to down the road. Obviously, Boris Johnson, as Prime Minister, has said he's keen to have elections as soon as possible. Jeremy Corbyn, leader of the opposition, saying, well, we'd like elections too, but not necessarily on your terms or at the time of your choosing. In terms of what you understand about the polling numbers we see today, what do you extrapolate from those in terms of a general election outcome right now?
We have to accept there will be an election at some point fairly soon, whether it's next week or a few months, it's going to happen. It's difficult to project in terms of results because for the first time ever, it is likely that we will see a series of pacts. Historically, the Liberal Democrats and the Greens have done 1 or 2 arrangements in a few constituencies. What we saw in a Welsh by-election a few weeks ago where all the Remain parties allied with the Liberal Democrats may become common practice. And the same, will the Conservatives have alliances with the Brexit Party? Will some Liberal Conservatives be allowed a free run by some Liberal Democrats? It's going to be very difficult to predict until we see the nominations for almost every constituency.
So Brexit is remaking the political landscape inside this building, but you're saying could also remake the landscape across the United Kingdom when it comes to fighting individual constituencies. How easy is it then for people to look at polls and understand what might happen after an election at this stage?
It's very difficult indeed. I was talking to a cabinet minister last night, and I said quite happily, I'll tell you what would happen if we had an election tomorrow, i.e. today, but don't ask me to tell you what the result would be at the end of October, because there are all these alliances potentially around. Some may fall apart, some may be done on a local level. Very, very difficult to predict, but as you say, absolutely unique in British politics.
You have the Conservative Party, if you look at the poll of polls at the moment, at around 34%. For viewers not perhaps that familiar with the UK electoral procedure, does that mean they end up with a third of the seats in the House of Commons?
No, you can't extrapolate, particularly on relatively low numbers in terms of anything below 40%. You cannot extrapolate what the result will be because you may get people switching votes on a tactical basis of the view that I hate that party, so I'll not vote for my own party, I'll vote for somebody else. And that's what I think will happen in a lot of constituencies, even if we don't have formal alliances between political parties, which I think is highly likely.
Again and again, investors, analysts, economists talk about fears of a Corbyn government. Our viewers talking about that, our guests talking about that very frequently. If you look at the numbers right now, you look at the possibilities right now around an election, how likely would you say it is that you end up with a Corbyn-led Labour government if we have an election in the next couple of months?
There is a possibility. There's no question, because you could finish up with Labour not being the largest party, the Conservatives being the largest party, but Labour being able to go into coalition with, for example, the Scottish Nationalists, who all the indications are at the moment will sweep most of Scotland. So the possibility of a coalition in some form or another, led by Jeremy Corbyn, is a prospect.
Robert Hayward, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. That's Robert Hayward, someone who knows a little bit about statistics and mathematics, I should add, and also a member of the House of Lords, which will be scrutinising this legislation over the next couple of days. And he says, at least, getting it through for royal assent by the beginning of next week, Jemana.
Absolutely, and he also doesn't rule out a snap election at some point in the next couple of months. Very interesting to hear what he had to say. All right, the EU's top Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, has reportedly told diplomats that Brexit talks are, quote, currently in a state of paralysis. In a leaked note seen by the Financial Times, Barnier warned of difficulties in agreeing a free trade deal, as Number 10 takes on a harder line on diverging from EU standards. As Barnier arrived for Brexit negotiations yesterday, a reporter asked if the talks were a waste of time. Take a listen to his response.
Are these talks a waste of time?
You can speak calmly. Be calm. Be calm, please.
Are these talks a waste of time?
No, after my meeting with the member states, now the Parliament, still at work, and I just want to tell you that the EU will remain in any circumstances vigilant, united, and calm.
Okay, EU vigilant, united, and calm. Not so much the case for sterling pound and the price action that we've had the last couple of days. Let's bring in Moritz Kramer, Chief Economic Advisor from Accreditas. Great to have you with us. Let's start out by talking about the pound here. As I was discussing with the guests yesterday, it seems to me that the absolute best case scenario is probably another extension, or even, I mean, very unlikely that we get a deal passed at this point, given, as Michel Barnier said, that the UK government hasn't really come with alternative proposals at this point. So best case scenario is an extension. Worst case scenario is still hard Brexit, a snap election, many other potential downside risks as well with a change of government. Why is the pound trading up at 122?
Yeah, well, I think it's a bit of a relief that that the hard Brexit seems to be off the table. Of the scenarios that you described, I think an extension is by far the most likely now. It's very difficult to see how the Prime Minister could not obey the orders of Parliament. And I think it's been pretty clear, and it will go through the Lords. There will be no filibuster, there will be royal assent. So there's a clear mandate to go to Brussels, unless there's a deal before October 19th. Now, what's the chances of that? I have to agree with Barnier, it's close to zero, because no negotiations are actually happening. And they've been negotiating since Article 50 was triggered for 888 days. Now we have like a bit more than 50 days left, and we have a much more antagonistic relationship between Brussels and Number 10. What's the chances of a breakthrough in that period of time? I think it's minimalistic. Now, the strategy of the UK government, the new UK government, was to just run down the clock and instill a sense of panic in the EU negotiating team, or the member states of the EU. That is clearly not going to happen. This is a total misjudgment of how the EU works. I think this has been one of the problems from the very beginning of the negotiation process, that the UK government did not understand how the EU works, how they negotiate, and the people that actually knew about it, they were taken out of the negotiation team. So grandstanding is not a strategy.
No, indeed not. I was going back and looking at the year-to-date performance of the pound.
Yes.
Versus the dollar, it's 4% weaker. Versus euro, it's only 0.2% weaker.
It is exactly at the same spot as it were on January 1st. This is remarkable, because back then you still had sort of more prospect of a proper deal being negotiated. In March we had all the indicative deals, so all of this was still on the table. Now, I think what you have now is a relief that you have probably another 3 months. But what can be achieved in the 3 months? I mean, the basic conflicts remain the same. It's basically the Irish backstop. Mm-hmm. So unless we have an election and a non-conservative government, these problems will continue to pop up. It's just delayed by 3 months.
My point is, so much of the narrative in the UK is about who's going to get hit harder on a Brexit, right? And every time there's bad German data, the Brexiteers are cheering, and every time there's bad UK data, the people in Europe are... So there's a narrative on both sides. But actually, if you look at the currency pair between euro and sterling, the market is saying that both are going to get equally hit.
Yeah, but that is just not true. I mean, this is delusional. The UK exports 15% of its GDP to Europe. Germany exports like 4% of its GDP to the UK. So overall, yes, there is a deficit in trade between the UK and Europe, but the UK is a much smaller place, so it hits it much bigger. And anyway, what you need to keep in mind, it's not trade that matters so much for the UK, it's services. And even on the WTO, services wouldn't be covered. So the UK will be hit immeasurably harder by a hard Brexit. This is why running down the clock just doesn't work.
So that means quickly you buy euro versus sterling?
I would, yes. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. All right. We'll pick up the conversation in the next chat. Also coming up on the show, the Switzerland's battle with the EU over equivalence. set an ominous example for the UK post-Brexit. We'll talk to the CEO of the Swiss exchange operator SIX Group after the break.
Big welcome to all my first-time Peloton riders.
At Romans, you can rent your next home from just £36, plus your first month's rent. No deposit.
No problem.
Romans, your trusted local property experts at romans.co.uk. Conditions and monthly fee apply.
At Tesco, we can pop our pasta in your Astra, our red Leicester in your Fiesta, or our mayo in your Mondeo. All you need to do is try click and collect. Just go to tesco.com, order your shopping, then click and collect. With the minimum basket spend now only £25. And if you fancy something a little more exotic, we can even put our pad thai in your Qashqai. Try click and collect at tesco.com. Every little helps. Selected larger stores, booking charge may apply. See online for full terms and conditions.
This one shouldn't take long. Of course, if it had a cover, I might not be bothered. Can't see what's under there. And then they'd have chained the back wheel. It would have taken me much longer, especially if the chain's off the ground. Makes it harder to cut. This one doesn't even have a lock on the front. So, in the time I've been talking to you, I've nicked it.
Over 9,000 scooters and motorbikes were stolen in London last year. Lock your bike, chain the rear wheel, and cover it to make it harder to steal. Lock, chain, cover. The Met Police.
Casa Bacardi is back, bringing a party with an unmissable lineup and tasty rum cocktails to London. With Bacardi's new Sound of Rum crew, featuring live sets from One Asen and P Money, MCing from Harry Pinero, and loads more. The perfect recipe for an epic night out. Casa Bacardi at Box Park Croydon on September 14th. For more info and to get your tickets now, head to boxpark.co.uk. Do what moves you. Over 18s only. Drink aware for the facts.
From the moment I saw you, the last of the litter, I knew you were the one, and we'd soon hear the pitter-patter of tiny paws on our kitchen floor, and tiny scratches on the bedroom door. You might sometimes be mischievous, sometimes be shy, but I know I found love in those kitten cat eyes. Join the free VIP Kitten Club from Pets at Home for advice and exclusive offers, including 10% off your first shop in store. Visit petsathome.com/kitten club or join in store. T's and C's apply.
Make sure you're uni ready with our huge range of practical essentials and home from home comforts and get 10% off for a limited time. T's and C's and exclusions apply. Dunelm, the home of homes.
Welcome back to the show. Swiss stocks have barely been impacted by a spat over equivalence with the EU. Brussels let the trading arrangement expire at the end of June as part of an ongoing dispute over long-standing financial, immigration and trade ties between the two sides. Sounds a bit familiar. A settlement could yet to be reached, but the standoff sets a precedent for what could face the UK in post-Brexit negotiations. I'm very happy to say that Jos Disselhoff, the CEO of SIX Group, is with us. So, as we just said, it looks as though that equivalence is that, well, we are currently in a non-equivalent situation between the UK and Switzerland. How has that impacted your overall trading volumes to start with?
It's a non-equivalence between the EU and Switzerland.
EU and Switzerland.
It actually, in the short term, has had a positive impact because 30% of the trading in Swiss shares used to happen in the EU. In the non-equivalence regime we are in now, and with the special law that the Swiss government put into place, all the trading that happened in the EU has moved to Switzerland. So we now have 100% of the market actually in Switzerland.
And if I take this as a template for what could happen to the city of London, I mean, obviously, Switzerland is a friendly face to the EU, and this has been an ongoing story for years now, and now has really turned on the head. I mean, it seems to me that if it's not easy for Swiss companies to get the equivalence from the EU, it's going to be very, very difficult for British companies operating within the city of London.
Yeah, I think two things are important there. First of all, equivalence is a technical thing. So technically the exchanges in Switzerland need to be equivalent to the EU laws. We are. Switzerland is technically equivalent. The EU has just used this as a political means to held Switzerland hostage to talk about the overall framework agreement. So you could see, and you do see that the stance of the EU against third-party countries is hardening more and more. And we in Switzerland have seen that. And you, of course, see that in the EU UK discussion also. So it is an example of how hard it can be.
And yet you say it hasn't really impacted your overall trading volumes. Have you ever thought about buying a bourse based in Europe to get access to that market again?
The reason why it hasn't impacted our trading volume is because our government, the Swiss government, has decided to put in a counter law to basically disallow Swiss shares to be traded in the EU in the future. And that has protected our integrity. And therefore, a need for me to move or to do anything within the EU is not there anymore. In the long run, I think it's not good for capital markets. It's better if there's open, transparent markets, if you can trade shares on different platforms in different jurisdictions. That's not the case now. So short term, okay, it looks good in terms of volume, but in the long run, I think it's not good for the capital markets. It needs to be free and accessible for every investor and every issuer.
Jumana, what you mentioned about is this a blueprint for the UK? I think that's a very critical question because the UK financial sector is, of course, immeasurably bigger and more important to the EU than the Swiss one, although the Swiss one is already important, no offense here. What we need to keep in mind is that the Financial Services Bill has not been passed by Parliament in the UK. The Financial Services Bill is important because it would allow the UK government and regulators to continue to implement new EU rules on financial services for 2 years. So this would basically empower the government to do that without having to go back to Parliament. Now, with Parliament prorogued, there is really no time to pass this bill before October 31st. So it's critical for the functioning, in my mind, and the continued equivalence of the City of London that either they squeeze this somehow into Parliament to pass it before 31st of October, or the extension of Article 50 happens. Otherwise, the City of London could actually end up operating in a limbo vis-à-vis its relationship with the EU. That would be hugely detrimental and disruptive for both sides.
And what's interesting about this is the whole narrative, as we've just been discussing, has been about the impact of tariffs on goods trading, with forgetting that actually about 70% of the UK economy is services, and therefore you need to do something to protect the services sector, particularly the financial services sector. If the UK does end up in a situation where there is no regulatory equivalence with the EU, do you think that could be much more detrimental for a country like the EU with a much larger financial system than Switzerland?
I think it will. There's only losers on both sides, and then it's a matter of magnitude and how big the loss is. That's my view on the situation. I'm not a specialist on Brexit. I think there are many people in this country who know this better than I do. I think for Switzerland itself, it is crucial that there is a well-functioning financial market connected to the rest of the world. If that's not happening, if your services and your financial industry cannot operate properly, that's gonna hurt your economy, that's gonna hurt your currency, it's gonna hurt in many different ways. So that's crucial that is properly dealt with and done in an orderly way. If you don't do that, you run a big risk, in my view.
One other strategic question. LSE recently announced that they're looking to buy Refinitiv, so getting involved in more data sources. Can you see yourself moving in that direction? Is there generally a trend out of exchanges towards acquiring more data sources?
We at SIX already have 40% of our business is already from the data business. We have a financial information data business already, next to the exchange and next to our banking services. So I always say jokingly, LSE is just copying the model that we already have, just a little bit bigger.
All right, then we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us on the show. Yasser Slahafe, the CEO of SIX Group, talking us through some of the repercussions, if at all, of the Swiss-EU ongoing tit-for-tat about regulatory equivalence. There's certainly something to watch out for when it comes to the UK discussions as well. Now, Italian Premier Giuseppe Conte's new government is being sworn in Rome right now. Five-star leader Luigi Di Maio will take on the role of foreign minister, while Roberto Gualtieri, a member of European Parliament from the PD, will be the finance and economy minister. So the markets had reacted quite positively to that outcome, particularly the finance ministry being taken over by PD. Let's bring back in Moritz Kramer, chief economic advisor from Accreditas. I mean, how do you think about Italy here? The BTP yields are rallying like there's no tomorrow.
Yes, no, they're at record levels now. It's remarkable. The 10-year bond of Italy is trading at 80-something basis points. If you told me that 2 years ago, I would have thought this is in the realm of impossibility. But things that never happened before happen every day in Europe now, and in the UK, of course, as well. So I think this rally is driven by relief that you don't have a Salvini government, because Salvini government, for good or worse, is still associated with the risk of maybe a more confrontational stance with the EU, potentially even an eventual exit from the Eurozone, which would be hugely damaging to Italy and Europe more broadly. So I think there's relief that the worst case hasn't happened. This is a typical Italian pattern. You're happy that the worst hasn't happened, but you really need to look for good things to happen. Now we have a government. What can this government actually achieve? They published this 26-point coalition agreement, which is fairly fuzzy, which talks about fiscal expansion, which Italy cannot afford. It does not talk about structural reforms, which Italy desperately needs.
Absolutely necessary.
What is actually achieved other than buying more time? We'll see. But for now, there's stabilization in the political arena. If Brexit wouldn't happen, this would be like the headline all over the place.
Oh yeah, trust me, I know. I was in Rome last week, and now everyone just wants to focus on Westminster. But the focus has moved away from Rome to Westminster, indeed. All right, Moritz Kramer, Chief Economic Advisor from Accredited, stays with us. The world's big investment banks have had their worst start to the year since 2006. And Goldman Sachs CFO says it's understandable they're concerned about central bank easing. Hear exclusively from Stephen Scher. That comes up next.
Looks like you're not sleeping well.
How did you know? At Romans, you can rent your next home from just £36, plus your first month's rent. No deposit.
No problem.
Romans, your trusted local property experts at romans.co.uk. Conditions and monthly fee apply.
At Tesco, we can pop our pasta in your Astra, our red Leicester in your Fiesta, or our mayo in your Mondeo. All you need to do is try click and collect. Just go to tesco.com, order your shopping, then click and collect. With the minimum basket spend now only £25. And if you fancy something a little more exotic, we can even put our pad thai in your Qashqai. Try click and collect at tesco.com. Every little helps. Selected larger stores. Booking charge may apply. See online for full terms and conditions.
This one shouldn't take long. Of course, if it had a cover, I might not be bothered. Can't see what's under there. And then they'd have chained the back wheel. It would have taken me much longer, especially if the chain's off the ground. Makes it harder to cut. This one doesn't even have a lock on the front. So, in the time I've been talking to you, I've nicked it.
Over 9,000 scooters and motorbikes were stolen in London last year. Lock your bike, chain the rear wheel, and cover it to make it harder to steal. Lock, chain, cover. The Met Police.
Casa Bacardi is back, bringing a party with an unmissable lineup and tasty rum cocktails to London. With Bacardi's new Sound of Rum crew, featuring live sets from One Asen and P Money, MCing from Harry Pinero, and loads more. The perfect recipe for an epic night out. Casa Bacardi at Box Park Croydon on September 14th. For more info and to get your tickets now, head to boxpark.co.uk. Do what moves you. Over 18s only. Drink aware for the facts.
At the Bank of Antandek, they're looking for a mascot.
We need an icon. Something that says high flying to all our mortgage customers.
Like a falcon or a stallion.
Or even better, a parrot. Check it out.
Meanwhile, at Santander, they're concentrating on helping customers find ways to take years off their mortgage with their overpayment calculator. See what's possible at Santander.
All applications are subject to status and our lending criteria. Your home may be repossessed if you do not keep up repayments on your mortgage.
From the moment I saw you, the last of the litter, I knew you were the one, and we'd soon hear the pitter-patter of tiny paws on our kitchen floor and tiny scratches on the bedroom door. You might sometimes be mischievous, sometimes be shy, but I know I found love in those kitten cat eyes. Join the free VIP Kitten Club from Pets at Home for advice and exclusive offers, including 10% off your first shop in store. Visit petsathome.com/kitten club or join in store. T's and C's apply.
Welcome to Street Signs. I'm Jemima Versace, and these are your headlines. Europe joins the rally as the Stock 600 hits its highest level since August the 1st, amid expectations of high-level trade talks between the US and China next month. Chip makers and autos lead gains as trade-sensitive sectors welcome the apparent easing of tensions, as China's Commerce Ministry says the US trade call this morning went very well. Sterling retreats from its biggest one-day gain in more than 5 months as the threat of a UK election still looms despite the government's double defeat in the House of Commons.
48 hours ago, he was leading the chance of stop the coup, let the people vote. Now he's saying stop the election and stop the people from voting.
Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam says she hopes the withdrawal of the controversial extradition bill will bring stability to the territory. Well, overnight markets were buoyed by the potential trade talks taking place between the US and China in October, and that has given a boost to Asian equities. Today in Europe, the picture is a little bit mixed. We've got FTSE 100 trading on the back foot, down 0.4 of a percentage point. As we were discussing on the show, plenty of political headwinds there, and no doubt the market is also fixed on the fact that we may be looking at a snap election at some point in the next couple of months. So FTSE 100 trading on the back foot. DAX up about 0.9 of a percentage point, and there we did have weaker German industrial orders for the month come in at negative 2.7%. So more weak manufacturing data coming out of Germany as well today. And then FTSE MIB, as the Italian government is being sworn in, we've got the Italian index up 0.4% and reacted positively to the announcement that a PD lawmaker will be in the finance ministry seat. We continue to see a rally for Italian assets, both in equities and in fixed income. But let's talk about foreign exchange as well. And today what we're seeing is euros pretty much holding firm above 110. At one point we had drifted below that level. That was a key psychological level for the market. We're holding in at around 110.30 today. Obviously all eyes on that ECB meeting next week. It's going to be a big one as far as that currency pair is concerned. And then cable is trading firmer as well today, up at 122.80, about 0.2 of a percentage point firmer. Again, a full 3 points now higher than where we were a couple of days ago when it looked as though we could have been headed for a no-deal Brexit on October 31st. But since then, the Parliament has intervened and the government has got defeated on 2 motions. So still a lot of turmoil there in the background. Let me take you to U.S. futures. U.S. futures bounced overnight on reports from the China Commerce Ministry that the two sides will be meeting in October. And indeed, a CNBC source has confirmed that the two sides had a call overnight. So you can see S&P, Dow, and NASDAQ are all pointed to open up in the green. S&P up 20 points, Dow up 200 points. Later today, you want to watch out for services PMI and productivity coming out of the U.S. as well. So don't forget about the data. Now, Stefan Engels will depart Commerzbank as CFO and take up the same role at Danske Bank in April 2020. He will take over from Christian Balzer, who will leave his position at the troubled Danish lender that has faced allegations of money laundering. And CYBG shares have plunged after the bank announced it will set aside up to £450 million for payment protection insurance provisions after a much higher than expected volume of inquiries and complaints. The FCA set an August 29th deadline for people who believed they had been missold the insurance, down 20% today, down about 70% in the last year. And the world's biggest investment banks are feeling the heat from a triple threat of factors, according to Industry Analyst Coalition. Sluggish economic growth, persistent low rates, and geopolitical tensions have driven revenues down to a 13-year low during the first half of this year. Equity trading desks put the most pressure on performance, with revenues falling 17% year on year across all regions. Does not paint a very good picture. And UBS is set to overhaul its embattled investment bank business after a run of bad quarters. According to a number of reports, the lender will fuse its equities division with its smaller foreign exchange, rates, and currencies unit. The restructuring, which could be announced as early as this week, will also include hundreds of jobs cuts. UBS has declined to comment on the reports. Concerns at investment banks over easing central bank policy are, quote, understandable, according to Goldman Sachs CFO Stephan Schur. Now, in an exclusive interview with CNBC, Schur played down the impact of lower interest rates on Goldman Sachs, but said the trend has kick-started anxious times for the banking industry as a whole.
It's less of a concern for us, just given the nature of our business model, meaning the way in which we fund and the floating rate nature of the assets doesn't lead to the kind of concern that other big commercial banks would have. But if you look at major money center banks in the U.S., as you do big money center banks here in Europe, you know, they all have anxiety about the prospect of ever lower rates and the inability to generate assets, you know, sufficient to meet, you know, their cost of capital and their cost of funding. And so It's understandable that that's a big concern. It's a concern shared on both sides of the Atlantic, but mostly by big money center banks in both jurisdictions.
Yeah, clearly in the States you still have quite a leeway to cut rates before you turn into negative territory. But still, do you think the yield curve will invert further, meaning that you could get negative yields also at the longer end in the American yield curve?
Well, we've seen the inversion, of the 10-year now at its widest since 2006, 2007. And I think it reflects a sentiment in the market, perhaps more than the actual data does, but the bond market is reflecting a sentiment that there is anxiety about the prospect of a recession, though again in the U.S., less evident in the data, perhaps more evident in a variety of different markets like Germany here in Europe. But it's possible, but I think the bond market is signaling something as it relates to the sentiment, and I suspect many central banks around the world, not least of which is the Fed, the ECB, are acting on that sentiment, as you might expect them to, so as to forestall, what may be on the come.
Are your American clients not hesitant to invest, like when it comes to capital goods currently, given that uncertainty which is stemming from the U.S.-China trade war?
I would say the uncertainty is in part from the U.S.-China trade issue, but you and I could discuss 6 other, political issues around the world, all of which weighs on the psychology that is evident in a boardroom or on a management team, which is, on one hand, their equity prices are elevated. Bond financing or financing for expansion is very cheap on an historical basis. Yet, notwithstanding those two positive factors, uncertainty as to where the market is going is weighing on boardrooms and management teams.
You're staying in Europe now for this week. It kind of reminds me to the time back at the debt crisis when the US was so strong, Europe had a problem, and we are once again in that weak spot looking at Italy. So what do you think? Is Italy a problem, or is it just a sideshow politically?
Well, I wouldn't call, the challenges of any given country in Europe a sideshow. But of course, it's all to be measured against the significance of any given geopolitical issue that's at play. Economic trends in Germany are a big issue. China trade with the U.S. and its impact on Germany is a big issue. What plays out in Italy or Spain, all of these in and of themselves are large, but taken together, they lead to the psychology that you were referring to that I suspect not only weighs on U.S. boardrooms and management teams, but equally on the European side as well.
You talked that Germany is an issue. Do you think that the economic model in Germany is sort of at risk to break?
Well, that would be a dramatic conclusion to draw. I think that, we're in the early days of a slowdown. I think that, many of us and many economists can point to particular issues, whether it's the automotive sector or the China trade issue, that weigh on the German economy. But I wouldn't be quite so dramatic in the characterization.
So a lot of headwinds for investment banks. So let's take a look at how U.S. Treasuries are faring today. As we said, the major story is out of the meeting to take place in October between China and the U.S. So that's given risky assets a bit of a boost this morning. But we're also seeing U.S. yields come under pressure. We sold off about 5 basis points in the 10-year, trading at around 150, the 2 years at 147, and then the 30-year is just around that 2% mark. We broke through it obviously yesterday, so around 5 basis points higher. Now, speaking with CNBC, former Fed Chairman Alan Greenspan said it won't be long before negative rates reach the United States.
You can see pretty much throughout the world, it's just a matter of time before it hits more in the United States. And I think the issue here is watch the 30-year U.S. Treasury yield. That's going to tell you what's happening.
Negative rates. All right, so let's talk about that with Moritz Kramer, the Chief Economic Advisor from Accreditas. Speaking of negative rates, we've got a very big ECB meeting coming up next week. The market wants the bazooka. What is the bazooka?
Well, I think the expectations have been raised in Sintra by Draghi's speech. This is a typical pattern. Draghi makes a speech, a trial balloon, the markets price it in, and then the governing council's hands are tied. Because if you don't follow through, then the markets would sell off, and there's fear of the consequences of that. So now we have had 5 years of negative rates in the Eurozone. We had 4 years of QE.
Yeah.
The core inflation rate has not budged at all. Inflation is still at 1%. Inflation expectations are dropping again. This strategy is not working as far as bringing inflation up. What it is working on is helping asset prices to increase and increase. And that, of course, is in the interest of market participants. So I think what we have now is really a lot of pressure that the ECB put on itself by raising expectations of the market and then having to follow through.
But equally more, it's just doing what it says on the tin. I mean, the central banks are getting a lot of backlash for doing what they are supposed to be doing. They look at their models, they're not reaching their inflation target. The models say ease, therefore they must ease. So perhaps a discussion should be, being taking place at a political level, at a governmental level, rather than at a central bank level, because they're simply doing what they're supposed to be doing at this point, given the output gap and some of the downside risks.
Well, that's ambiguous, because the treaty says the ECB has to target price stability, right? We have 1% inflation, you can say that's price stability. The just below 2%, that's something that the Governing Council decided in 2003, and they're talking about changing that again in the last press conference of Draghi. He mentioned that, but really saying we would allow some overshoot. But there's no point in saying you would allow overshoot if you're not even achieving the target that you set yourself, because there you need to get first. So what I'm saying is that if you have a strategy that has not delivered over such many years, why should I believe that if you cut another 20 basis points on the deposit rate, if you reinstate QE, it would work? Look at QE was stopped at the end of last year. Since then, the 10-year bund dropped by 90 basis points. The Italian 10-year BTP dropped by 150 basis points. So clearly the long-term rates are not determined by QE. They're determined by something very different. So why would this work this time? I don't know.
Looking at your notes, 2 words jumped out to me: helicopter money. You think it's time for helicopter money?
Well, I think if you believe you need to do something, you might want to try something else rather than continuing doing what you've been doing and that didn't
But how
deliver.
can that actually be done at a Eurozone level? Because they can't agree on putting a banking union together. How are they going to agree on handouts, individual handouts to people at a centralized fiscal level?
No, it's not at the fiscal level. I think the ECB would have to do it. You can't do it to the fiscal accounts because that would be monetary financing of fiscal affairs. That's definitely outlawed by the treaty. That's a no-go area. But what you could do, you could give individuals money and just say you get a certain amount of money from the central bank directly every month until you hit the target. So you would have several advantages with that. First of all, you would have a much more direct transmission mechanism because the consumer has the money in the pocket and spends it. If you give the money to the banks, they're not lending, partly because they're afraid, but also there's no demand for credit. No matter what the interest rate is, there will not be more demand for investment now that you have inventories rising, order books shrinking. We just heard the latest German data. So this is not going to do anything. If you give people the money straight away, they will spend some of it. You would also, I think, minimize the risk of a backlash in the sense that Donald Trump would declare this is like currency manipulation if you cut the interest rates. And then you would have a trade war potentially with the US at your hands, which would be deflationary and counterproductive. So, I'm not really propagating that they should do helicopter money, but if they want to do something, doing more of the same doesn't seem to be leading to the target. Try something else.
Certainly there's a need for a creative solution. We'll have to see what Madame Lagarde brings to the table. Moritz, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us on the show today. Moritz Kramer, Chief Economic Advisor from Accreditus. Now, Dassault Aviation shares are on track for their best day in almost 5 years. This after reporting a huge beat on first half operating income, which rose 125%. The French plane maker also backed its full year target for higher net sales. And Safran shares rose after the company posted a 36% jump in first half recurring operating income, beating expectations. The French aerospace supplier also upped its full year profit forecast to above 20%. And sticking to France as well, Casino shares are trading at their highest in 6 months on news 2 Czech investors have taken a 4.6% stake in the company. Their firm, Visa Equity Investment, which failed to buy German retailer Metro in June, has backed the embattled CEO's strategy. And privacy concerns remain a troubling issue for many users of smart technology after Apple was forced to apologize for human contractors listening in on recordings of its Siri assistant. The company announced changes to its privacy policy in the wake of the revelations, and CNBC spoke with the vice president of Amazon Fire TV and asked him to address similar concerns levied at the e-commerce giant.
Privacy is super critical, and that's why with our devices, I think you saw in the demos that every time we went up there, we always unmuted it because we have a hardware mute whenever you want to make it stop listening. And of course, we're only listening when you say Alexa. And then we've also created a bunch of new tools for you to be able to review and delete your recordings. It's incredibly important, our customers' privacy for us.
And is this something that's top of mind for, Fire TV or really any segment like yours right now when you're at a company like Amazon?
Customer trust is absolutely top of mind in everything we do. If we don't have that, we're not going to build great experiences that they love.
And coming up ahead, markets rise as Hong Kong's chief executive formally kills a controversial extradition bill. But will it be enough to stop the protests?
Moving from one rental home to another is so expensive.
Last time, we had to pay hundreds to move in, the first month's rent,
and then a big deposit. With Romans, it doesn't have to be like this. It doesn't. At Romans, you really can move in from just £36, plus your first month's rent.
And that's it.
Nothing more to add. Move in from just £36, plus your first month's rent. With Romans. No deposit.
No problem.
Romans, your trusted local property experts at romans.co.uk. Conditions and monthly fee apply.
At Tesco, we can pop our pasta in your Astra, our red Leicester in your Fiesta, or our mayo in your Mondeo. All you need to do is try click and collect. Just go to tesco.com, order your shopping, then click and collect. With the minimum basket spend now only £25. And if you fancy something a little more exotic, we can even put our pad thai in your Qashqai. Try click and collect at tesco.com. Every little helps. Selected larger stores. Booking charge may apply. See online for full terms and conditions.
This one shouldn't take long. Of course, if it had a cover, I might not be bothered. Can't see what's under there. And then they'd have chained the back wheel. It would have taken me much longer, especially if the chain's off the ground. Makes it harder to cut. This one doesn't even have a lock on the front. So, in the time I've been talking to you, I've nicked it.
Over 9,000 scooters and motorbikes were stolen in London last year. Lock your bike, chain the rear wheel, and cover it to make it harder to steal. Lock, chain, cover. The Met Police.
Did someone say winter sun? It's that time again. And this year at Jet2 Holidays, we're saying Cyprus. On this incredible island, you get it all. A choice of 4- and 5-star hotels, amazing ancient ruins for culture-packed days out, hiking and cycling trails for active adventures, and plenty of blue flag beaches for soaking up that winter sun. Book Cyprus now with just a £60 deposit. Jet2 Holidays. Package holidays you can trust. APRA and ATOL protected, subject to availability and conditions.
At the Bank of Antandek, they're looking for a mascot.
We need an icon. Something that says high flying to all our mortgage customers.
Like a falcon or a stallion.
Or even better, a parrot. Check it out.
Meanwhile, at Santander, they're concentrating on helping customers find ways to take years off their mortgage with their overpayment calculator. See what's possible at Santander.
All applications are subject to status and our lending criteria. Your home may be repossessed if you do not keep up repayments on your mortgage.
Welcome back to the show. Russian President Vladimir Putin is hosting the leaders of India, Japan, Malaysia, and Mongolia for a plenary session at the Eastern Economic Forum. Tanvir is in Vladivostok, where she had the chance to speak with Russia's Minister for Industry and Trade. Tanvir, what did the minister have to tell you?
Jamal, good morning. You spoke about that plenary session. The all-important plenary session is underway. And may I just add that that's a collective economic might of nearly $8 trillion on stage right now. And they're discussing, of course, serious commitments to one another in terms of building their economic relations. But energy is a central theme at this summit. And as I spoke with the Industry and Trade Minister of Russia, this is what he had to say about the specific plans they have about exploration activities in the Arctic region, because it is all about the Arctic region now.
If we are talking about using the north route in Arctic, it's about the saving time in logistics, in transportation from, I would say, region to region. And in this case, we can see that annually there is the growth of transport, cargo transportation. We're expecting in the nearest 10 years to reach 200 million tons every year. And to reach it, we need additional fleet of the icebreakers. So you know that we have the largest fleet of the icebreakers, not only the diesel, but the nuclear icebreakers. And we're expecting to build the newest icebreaker, 120 megawatts power, and it will be the hugest in the world.
So there you have it, Jumana. Clearly, there are a lot of plans up in the north. But what's interesting and the dynamic which is at play out here is that for China, India, Japan, they together account for 20% of the energy demand. You add Russia to the equation, and that's 25%. But out of all these countries, Russia is the only major energy supplier, or the country with the energy surplus. So given Middle Eastern tensions, that's going to be an important equation that all of the countries in Asia would want to develop. In fact, Asia Pacific would want to develop with Russia going forward. Back to you.
And of course, as you say, Russia do have the competitive advantage there, because out of the list of countries you mentioned, they are the only energy suppliers. Tanvir, great to see you on our show. That was Tanvir live in Vladivostok. Now, Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam says she hopes the full withdrawal of a controversial extradition bill will help solve the current crisis and move forward from months of unrest. Lam bowed to protest pressure and formally killed the bill yesterday, although demonstrations continued after her announcement last night. Now, Emily Tan filed this report from Hong Kong.
Carrie Lam has acceded to one of 5 protester demands and unveiling a package of actions in an effort to find a way out of the current crisis. First and foremost, the Fugitive Offenders Bill is formally withdrawn. 2, the government will support the work of the Independent Police Complaints Council and appoint 2 new members. 3, begin direct dialogue with the community this week. And 4, to invite community leaders, professionals, academics to examine and review deep-rooted problems and advise on solutions. Speaking to the media this morning, the chief executive, in responding to whether this package of actions was too little too late, she said the package of measures was to be taken together, providing the basis of dialogue to help break the impasse. But don't look to one measure, she says, in isolation. And she goes on to explain that the decision to introduce the extradition bill was solely that of the SAR government.
The decision is one of the Hong Kong SAR government. In the same way that the bill was introduced, the bill was initiated, introduced, and taken forward by the Hong Kong SAR government. But I'm sure you want to ask about the position of the Central People's Government, so may I just also supplement that throughout the whole process, the Central People's Government took the position that they understood why we have to do it. They respected my view, and they supported me all the way.
Lam suspended the bill in early June and reiterated that there was never any plan to resume the bill. Suspended, calling the bill dead, and after 13 weeks, she finally uses the word protesters were calling for, withdraw. But this doesn't necessarily mean the end to the protests. On Saturday, another stress test of the Hong Kong airport and a blocking of traffic there is expected. Protesters are also planning to surround Government House, which is where the chief executive resides. Then on Sunday, there is talk of a march to the U.S. consulate. Protesters still insist on Lam fulfilling the remaining 4 of 5 demands, which include giving amnesty to those arrested and restarting the political reform process. I'm Emily Tan in Hong Kong. Back to you.
And Hurricane Dorian is moving towards the coastal U.S. and is set to reach North Carolina by Friday. From Florida to the Carolinas, millions have already fled as another dangerous storm surge is anticipated. Jamie Garola is in St. Augustine, Florida, with more.
A desperate rush in the Bahamas, where thousands are stranded on the islands of Abaco and Grand Bahama, ravaged by days of brutal winds, relentless rain, and a deadly storm surge.
We need help. We need help.
The scope of the devastation in the Bahamas is staggering. The Abaco Islands decimated. 45% of the homes there and in Grand Bahama are damaged or destroyed.
It's deteriorating really fast, mentally, emotionally, physically, and there's a lot of people that are missing.
But Dorian isn't done yet. now off the Georgia coast taking aim at the Carolinas.
It's a little exciting, but not quite Florence level of last year. Hopefully it doesn't do the same damage, but, I mean, there's always a chance.
Millions of people not taking any chances, evacuating the coast for higher ground.
We have no idea how big the surge is going to be and what that's going to mean. And absolutely, if there's flooding, we can't do nothing for you at that point.
Forecasters predicting as much as 15 inches of rain and storm surge that could reach 7 feet. In St. Augustine, Florida, Jamie Garola, NBC News.
And that caps our show today. I'm Joanna Versace. Worldwide Exchange is coming up next.
At CDW, we get the trying to simplify data storage.
At Tesco, we can pop our pasta in your Astra, our red Leicester in your Fiesta, or our mayo in your Mondeo. All you need to do is try click and collect. Just go to tesco.com, order your shopping, then click and collect. With the minimum basket spend now only £25. And if you fancy something a little more exotic, we can even put our pad thai in your Qashqai. Try click and collect at tesco.com. Every little helps. Selected larger stores. Booking charge may apply. See online for full terms and conditions.
This one shouldn't take long. Of course, if it had a cover, I might not be bothered. Can't see what's under there. And then they'd have chained the back wheel. It would have taken me much longer, especially if the chain's off the ground. Makes it harder to cut. This one doesn't even have a lock on the front. So, in the time I've been talking to you, I've nicked it.
Over 9,000 scooters and motorbikes were stolen in London last year. Lock your bike, chain the rear wheel, and cover it to make it harder to steal. Lock, chain, cover. The Met Police.
Did someone say winter sun? It's that time again, and this year at Jet2 Holidays, we're saying Cyprus. On this incredible island, you get it all. A choice of 4- and 5-star hotels, amazing ancient ruins for culture-packed days out, hiking and cycling trails for active adventures, and plenty of blue flag beaches for soaking up that winter sun. Book Cyprus now with just a £60 deposit. Jet2 Holidays. Package holidays you can trust. APRA protected, subject to availability and conditions.
No. No. No.
What are you doing?
I don't like any of our preset radio stations. We need a new car.
With the Jaguar E-Pace at $299 a month on personal contract hire, you'll find a reason.
That's better. And it's a Jaguar.
Initial rental £3,588. 48-month term. Subject to status. 8,000 miles per annum. Excess mileage and return conditions apply. No ownership option. Ends 30th of September. Participating retailers only. Jaguar contract hire.
From the moment I saw you, the last of the litter, I knew you were the one, and would soon hear the pitter-patter of tiny paws on our kitchen floor and tiny scratches on the bedroom door. You might sometimes be mischievous, sometimes be shy, but I know I found love in those kitten cat eyes. Join the free VIP Kitten Club from Pets at Home for advice and exclusive offers, including 10% off your first shop in store. Visit petsathome.com/kitten club or join in store. T's and C's apply.
Strength and things. Strength and things. Strength and things. Strength and things. Strings and things and strings, strings, strings and things. Strings, strings, strings and things. Strings, strings, strings and things. Strings and
Now there's a whole range of strings and things called strings and things, including cheese strings, yollies, and new cheese shapes. Find them all in the cheese and yogurt aisle.
strings and things.
Make sure you're uni-ready with our huge range of practical essentials and home-from-home comforts and get 10% off for a limited time. T's and C's and exclusions apply. Dunelm, the home of homes.
Millions of people are missing out by having a current account that doesn't pay them any interest on their hard-earned money. TSB offers interest to all their Plus account customers for no monthly fee. Plus, you can stop your friends and family missing out by recommending the Plus account to them. And when they switch, you'll both earn £75. Search online or visit your local branch. Terms and conditions apply.
Top 5 at 5, talking again. Top U.S. and Chinese officials set to meet next month to try to hammer out a trade deal. That news sending stock futures higher. But is the optimism really warranted here? Slacking off. Online messaging company Slack disappointing the street in its first report as a public company. Shares, they are sinking. Hurricane Dorian, it is back to a Category 3 status. It is now threatening parts of North and South Carolina as the death toll in the Bahamas rises. And trimming the fat at one of the world's biggest investment banks, what Goldman Sachs has in store for some of its top partners. It is Thursday, August 5th, and Worldwide Exchange begins right now. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome from wherever in the world that you may be watching. I am Brian Sullivan. Thanks for joining us right here on Worldwide Exchange. Here is the stock of the day. Now, the ticker may say work, but something isn't working, at least for investors right now. Online messaging firm Slack shares, they are down 12% right now in the after-hours market as its first quarterly report as a public company disappoints. We'll dig more into these numbers in a moment. But first, to the overall markets, where stock futures, they are going the opposite way. They are rising. Dow futures, they are up a nice 238 right now. This is reports say the U.S. and China are set to resume face-to-face high-level trade negotiations next month, with preliminary talks happening as soon as next week. As stock futures go up, bonds go down a little bit. The benchmark 10-year note yield, 1.51%. Look at that. We are, what do they call it? D-inverted, I guess is the term. 147, 151. All right. What exactly can we possibly expect from these reported trade talks? Maybe the bigger question, will they actually happen? Let's welcome back in Tracy Potts, who joins us now live from Washington with more. Good morning, Tracy.
Hey there, Brian. Good morning. So the Chinese are giving us a lot more specific details on when they might happen than we're getting from the U.S. right now. On Thursday morning, there was a phone call confirming that the talks are back on, and that is something that Wall Street seemed to respond to, given what we saw earlier in the week after those trade tariffs were imposed. So this, according to the Chinese, is what's happening. Later this month in September, the two sides are going to get together essentially to lay the groundwork for when these talks will happen and what these talks will look like. The U.S. has not yet confirmed, but the Chinese say that the actual trade talks will resume sometime in early October, and they will include the U.S. Trade Representative and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. The tariffs, as you know, rocked the markets on Tuesday, which was the first trading day after they kicked in on Sunday. But yesterday, the Dow was up on news that it looks like the U.S. and China are ready to sit down and talk again to try to end this trade war.
And stock futures, they are up as well. Tracy Potts in D.C., thank you very much. Well, trade is not the only big global story happening right now, because the political and Brexit drama continues in the UK. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been dealt another blow in his fight to deliver a Brexit by October 31st after members of his own party turned against him. Willem Marks joining us now live outside of Parliament in London with more on this story. Willem.
Brian, important to note at this point that some of those former members of the Conservative Party are no longer members of that party after he stripped them of their parliamentary party membership. What that meant last night when the lower chamber here, the House of Commons, tried to push through this piece of legislation to block a no-deal Brexit at the end of October is that the government lost. A couple of hours later, in response to that, the government tried to call for a fresh general election, and they lost again because hundreds of opposition lawmakers abstained on that key vote. They say that allowing Boris Johnson to pursue an election right now is a poisoned chalice, that he will use Brexit as a cudgel with voters, and they want to make sure that this legislation gets the Queen's assent approval early next week before they're even willing to talk about potential elections.
When should we expect this potential new election?
That is a very difficult question to answer right now, Brian. What we know, Boris Johnson would like to see one in the middle of October. That date's important because a couple of days after the date he's looking for, the 15th of October, there's a meeting of European heads of state, a council in Brussels. That would be a moment, he thinks, where he could potentially wrest some fresh concessions from the Europeans over this Brexit deal. And then, of course, it would just be a matter of days until that October 31st deadline. The Labour Party, in particular, the main opposition here in the UK, saying they don't like that plan one bit. They'd like to make sure that there is an election after that European Council meeting, at which point there would, in theory, be an extension to that Brexit deadline. Everybody could heave a sigh of relief and then get on with the business of campaigning in a national vote.
Willem Marks, outside of the Parliament in the UK, where the drama, I mean, it's tough to follow, but we appreciate the daily stories, Willem. Thank you very much. All All right, also happening right now, Hurricane Dorian won't just go away. In fact, the storm has strengthened. It is now back to Category 3 status as storm force winds hammer Georgia and parts of the South Carolina coast. And that is where we find NBC's Jay Gray, who has moved north to Wilmington, North Carolina, ahead of that storm. Jay.
Hey, Brian, what kind of staying power this storm? It's been unbelievable to see this. We started in Florida, now all the way to North Carolina, and this storm still not exactly clear on where or when it may make that second landfall. Here in Wilmington, we've seen some rain, some winds pick up overnight into the early morning. Calm right now. That's all going to change as we move throughout the day and the storm gets closer. It is targeting this area for that second landfall, and that would likely come sometime late tonight into the early morning tomorrow. Winds are going to be an issue. We could see gusts 100 to 120 miles an hour, but it's the rain, it's the storm surge that is the primary concern, and flooding is going to be an issue along the coast, and it'll likely continue to be this way until the storm, maybe sometime Saturday, makes that big turn, gets back out into the Atlantic. But right now, we are bracing for what's going to be another hit from this monster storm.
And Jay, is the storm still moving at that incredibly slow speed with which we saw over the Bahamas? So when this thing hits, it's not going to be a fast-moving storm. It could pound this region and then move up north for days.
No, you're right, and that's the big concern. It is forecast to speed up. Right now, it's moving at about 7 miles an hour, and it could linger once it gets over land. If it does that, the flooding is really going to dramatically increase. We've already had a lot of rain over the last month in these areas, and then you add water to that from this storm, and there's just nowhere for it to go except into places it's not supposed to be.
Yeah, and this is a region where you are, Jay, that is still struggling with the aftermath of Hurricane Florence last year, where we saw signs for the Cape Fear River and water overflowing gas stations. They cannot get a break. Jay Gray in Wilmington, North Carolina, thank you very much. Well, we're going to have much more on the storm coming up when we speak with South Carolina Port Authority CEO Jim Newsom later on this hour about how that major port and really the entire business community of the region is prepping for Dorian's arrival. All right, also ahead, big changes for the upper echelons of Goldman Sachs. CEO David Solomon reportedly looking to cut down on the number of people earning a partnership paycheck. Plus, Slack sinking. Company executives learning the hard way what it's like to be a publicly listed stock that misses Wall Street's estimates. But first, maybe called the Winslow perspective. One top fund manager says it's got maybe a secret sauce to navigating the twists and turns of today's market. A very busy hour still ahead when Worldwide Exchange returns.
At Tesco, we can pop our pasta in your Astra, our Red Leicester in your Fiesta, or our mayo in your Mondeo. All you need to do is try Click and Collect. Just go to Tesco.com, order your shopping, then click and collect. With the minimum basket spend now only £25. And if you fancy something a little more exotic, we can even put our pad thai in your Qashqai. Try Click and Collect at Tesco.com. Every little helps. Selected larger stores. Booking charge may apply. See online for full terms and conditions.
This one shouldn't take long. Of course, if it had a cover, I might not be bothered. Can't see what's under there. And then they'd have chained the back wheel. It would have taken me much longer, especially if the chain's off the ground. Makes it harder to cut. This one doesn't even have a lock on the front. So, in the time I've been talking to you, I've nicked it.
Over 9,000 scooters and motorbikes were stolen in London last year. Lock your bike, chain the rear wheel, and cover it to make it harder to steal. Lock, chain, cover. The Met Police.
Strength and things. Strength and things. Strength and things. Strings and things. Strings and things and strings, strings, strings and things. Strings, strings, strings and things. Strings, strings, strings and things. Strings and
Now there's a whole range of strings and things called strings and things, including cheese strings, yollies, and new cheese shapes. Find them all in the cheese and yogurt aisle.
Strings and things.
Make sure you're uni-ready with our huge range of practical essentials and home-from-home comforts and get 10% off for a limited time. T's and C's and exclusions apply. Dunelm, the home of homes.
Daddy, you know my birthday
family party?
Yes.
Can we do painting?
Of course.
And can we have fireworks?
Absolutely.
And can everyone in Year 4 come?
The more the merrier.
You're very relaxed about this.
At John Lewis Finance, we've crafted our premier home insurance with real care, so it provides accidental damage cover for those unexpected mishaps. We're also a Which recommended provider for Home Insurance 2019. Find out more at johnlewisfinance.com. Home insurance from John Lewis Finance. Excess and exclusions apply.
All right, welcome back and good morning. It is 5:11 and Dow futures. They are up more than 200 points right now. Well, shares of Goldman Sachs, they have not rallied. In fact, they're down 15% over the past year. And now CEO David Solomon may be looking to trim the top ranks, with several partners at the investment bank reportedly eyeing the exits. Rahel Solomon joining us now with more on the Goldman story. Rahel.
Hi, good morning, Brian. So as many as a dozen partners at Goldman, or 15%, could reportedly leave by the end of this year. That is higher than the typical turnover. The Wall Street Journal says that they're negotiating their exit from the bank. A report says that senior executives, including Chief Technology Officer Alicia Wiesel and Head of Global Research Stephen Strongen, are in talks to step down. Senior partner Jeff Needleman quit yesterday. This is less than a year after being named head of Goldman's stock trading group. And Marty Chavez, who is co-head of the trading division, is retiring. That's according to a memo sent to employees on Tuesday. So Goldman is in the midst of a top-to-bottom review launched by CEO David Solomon, who took over last October as the company looks to diversify its revenue streams. The Journal says that management has been trying to make Goldman more efficient by flattening organizational charts, eliminating old technology, and also shifting some staff to lower-cost hubs. New data out today from industry analyst Coalition shows that the world's biggest investment banks have had their worst start to a year since 2006, with combined revenue down 11% through June. Shares of Goldman, Brian, are down 10% under David Solomon. I'll send it back to you.
All right, Rahel, thank you very much. We'll see you in a bit. All right, back to the markets now. Futures pointing to a sharply higher open on Wall Street. But as investors have learned the hard way in recent months, 2 good days doth not a trend make. Your next guest says he might have a little bit of a secret sauce for what he calls today's two-tiered market. Joining us now on his worldwide exchange debut, Justin Kelly, Chief Investment Officer of Winslow Capital, an affiliate of Nuveen, and manager of the 4-star Winslow Large Cap Growth Fund, which is up just 24%. You're only 24% this year, Justin? Come on.
Yeah. Well, Brian, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. That's a great return, by the way. How have you done it? What stocks have worked this year? And have you been able to identify either that sauce or some kind of a trend in what has been a really kind of a crazy market?
Right. So the market has had a big narrowing this year. There's fewer companies that are able to produce strong earnings growth in a slowing economy. The Winslow philosophy is that growth companies make for the best long-term stocks. And there are 2 types of growth companies in particular that make for great stocks. The first is what we call the sustaining growth companies. So those are companies like Visa, MasterCard, Costco, that have a growth rate today that's similar to what they had a few years ago, and importantly, will still be growing at those same rates a few years from now. They're never cheap stocks, but they work on the compounding of the growth. Now, the second type of growth company that makes for a great stock is what we call the improving growth story. That is companies where the growth rate is actually increasing over time. And some recent examples of that would be Intuit. Ferrari is another example.
Ferrari?
Yes. So this is where you can win both on the market underestimating the magnitude of the growth and then potentially even some valuation expansion.
Well, it's amazing. I mean, given the trade fight, given Hong Kong, given Brexit, given all this talk about slowdowns in the U.S. economy, that there are companies that are increasing their earnings power.
Yeah, exactly. And they're doing it mostly through innovation. And you see that with Ferrari coming out with a number of new products, Intuit using machine learning to advance its own products to a broader range of audiences.
Are there small companies that are doing well and are worth your clients' money? Or is it really the big companies? Because when we look at your rundown of your top 10 holdings, you get a lot of the mega caps. And there's this theme growing that they're the ones that can really navigate and adjust. And the small companies simply can't do it.
Right. So there are 2 big trends that are really defining the market today, and we think will define the market really over the next decade. And firstly is that global GDP is growing at a much slower rate than it did in the past. Last decade, it grew at 4%. More recently, it's been growing at 3%, and it's likely to grow maybe a little even slower than that going forward. So That's an important trend. And the second trend is that every company is transitioning to the fourth industrial revolution, or retooling their business from the analog world to the digital world. And so the mega cap companies, particularly the tech companies, seem to be more on the front foot of this trend, because they can use their scale, and also large consumer companies. Think about how Nike is spreading its investments over a large customer base versus, say, Under Armour as an example, which has to make the same types of investments for the digital world, but they don't have the scale to do so.
We're seeing Dow futures up 200 and some points on reports that China and U.S. trade negotiators may meet at some point. Literally, we're seeing the markets move on a report. There's a possibility of a meeting.
Right.
Maybe.
Right.
What does that tell you about the health or lack of health of this market?
Right. So we have definitely been in a two-tiered market this year, where some companies who are able to grow through this slower economic times have been really favored and have been recoupling with a lower risk-free rate. There's a whole other part of the stock market which has not participated because they're very concerned about the earnings risk to the company. Those would be a lot of the manufacturing-oriented companies, because we can see the global PMI has now dipped below 50. So any easing of the trade war tensions would allow many of those companies to see better earnings growth trends going forward. And those
so it will help. If we get a deal of some kind, it should help.
Yeah, it'll help the earnings growth profile, and thus the equity risk premium can decline for those companies, and they can be good stocks again.
Justin Kelly, a pleasure to have you on. Welcome to Worldwide Exchange.
Yeah,
our little
little
tight-knit but wonderful family here.
It's great to be here.
Thank you. All right, on deck, trade tensions, as we just talked about, they may be easing a bit, but your next guest says China is finding that life without America may be just fine. And later on, guess who's coming to the White House today? President Trump's mystery CEO revealed.
Morning, everyone. I can find and fund my car, from a Mini to a Jaguar.
Feel good car buying from findandfundmycar.com is the place where you can find quality used cars from trusted dealers rated by you, and where you can fund your car with finance to fit your budget. It's feel good car buying, all in one place.
Shouldn't be a carry on, choose findandfundmycar.com.
At Romans, you can rent your next home from just £36, plus your first month's rent. No deposit.
No problem.
Romans, your trusted local property experts at romans.co.uk. Conditions and monthly fee apply.
At Tesco, we can pop our pasta in your Astra, our red Leicester in your Fiesta, or our mayo in your Mondeo. All you need to do is try click and collect. Just go to tesco.com, order your shopping, then click and collect. With the minimum basket spend now only £25. And if you fancy something a little more exotic, we can even put our pad thai in your Qashqai. Try click and collect at tesco.com. Every little helps. Selected larger stores. Booking charge may apply. See online for full terms and conditions.
This one shouldn't take long. Of course, if it had a cover, I might not be bothered. Can't see what's under there. And then they'd have chained the back wheel. It would have taken me much longer, especially if the chain's off the ground. Makes it harder to cut. This one doesn't even have a lock on the front. So, in the time I've been talking to you, I've nicked it.
Over 9,000 scooters and motorbikes were stolen in London last year. Lock your bike, chain the rear wheel, and cover it to make it harder to steal. Lock, chain, cover. The Met Police.
Did someone say winter sun? It's that time again, and this year at Jet2 Holidays, we're saying Cyprus. On this incredible island, you get it all. A choice of 4- and 5-star hotels, amazing ancient ruins for culture-packed days out, hiking and cycling trails for active adventures, and plenty of blue flag beaches for soaking up that winter sun. Book Cyprus now with just a £60 deposit. Jet2 Holidays. Package holidays you can trust. APRA and ATOL protected, subject to availability and conditions.
Strength and things. Strength and things. Strength and things. Strength and things. Strings and things and strings and things. Strings and things. Strings and things.
Now there's a whole range of strings and things called strings and things, including cheese strings, yollies, and new cheese shapes. Find them all in the cheese and yogurt aisle.
Strings and things. All right, there you go. Welcome back. It is 5:20 here on the East, 4:20 there in Chicago. Good morning, wherever you may be. Let's get a check on some of the big stocks that are on the move today. Well, really, it's all about software and technology on this Thursday. First up is Slack, posting a smaller than expected loss in the second quarter. Its first report since going public in June. Revenue top forecast, but investors not impressed. Shares tumbling, the company projecting a bigger than expected third quarter loss and slowing sales growth in the second half of the year. Slack shares are down 12.5% right now. The Slack CEO will be on Squawk Box at 8 a.m. Eastern. Cloudera shares are trading sharply higher this morning. Software makers adjusted results, topping forecasts, and now it is raising its sales guidance for the year thanks to higher subscription revenue. That stock up nearly 14%. And finally, Palo Alto Networks, fourth quarter results topping forecasts on strong demand for its cloud security products. The company expects to grow sales at a double-digit pace over the next 3 years. The stock is up 6%. And another big guest here on CNBC, they don't call us the worldwide leader in business news for nothing, because the CEO of Palo Alto Networks will be on at 9:15 on Squawk on the Street. Also got an analyst call to tell you about this morning. In fact, one that is crossing right now. Deutsche Bank initiating coverage of Lyft with a buy rating, saying the stock may be bottoming out. The analyst argues the stock has been weak for various reasons, despite what they call robust quarterly results. Lyft shares actually getting a lift on that upgrade, up 1.4% right now. Deutsche Bank initiating with a buy, but look at that. Stock has gone from nearly 80 right after its IPO down to 47. All right, still to come. Why the Fed could be the one thing set to throw some cold water on our recent rally. That's right, the Fed. Could it hurt the stock rally? Plus, another scandal in Japan. Misconduct revealed at one of the top of the world's largest automakers. That story and much more. We come back right after this.
So,
I can find and fund my car, from a Mini to a Jaguar.
Feel good car buying from findandfundmycar.com is the place where you can find quality used cars from trusted dealers rated by you, and where you can fund your car with finance to fit your budget. It's feel good car buying all in one place.
Carry on, choose findandfundmycar.com.
Moving from one rental home to another is so expensive.
Last time, we had to pay hundreds to move in, the first month's rent,
and then a big deposit. With Romans, it doesn't have to be like this. It doesn't? At Romans, you really can move in from just £36, plus your first month's rent.
And that's it?
Nothing more to add. Move in from just £36, plus your first month's rent. With Romans. No deposit.
No problem.
Romans, your trusted local property experts at romans.co.uk. Conditions and monthly fee apply.
At Tesco, we can pop our pasta in your Astra, our red Leicester in your Fiesta, or our mayo in your Mondeo. All you need to do is try click and collect. Just go to tesco.com, order your shopping, then click and collect. With the minimum basket spend now only £25. And if you fancy something a little more exotic, we can even put our pad thai in your Qashqai. Try click and collect at tesco.com. Every little helps. Selected larger stores. Booking charge may apply. See online for full terms and conditions.
This one shouldn't take long. Of course, if it had a cover, I might not be bothered. Can't see what's under there. And then they'd have chained the back wheel. It would have taken me much longer, especially if the chain's off the ground. Makes it harder to cut. This one doesn't even have a lock on the front. So, in the time I've been talking to you, I've nicked it.
Over 9,000 scooters and motorbikes were stolen in London last year. Lock your bike, chain the rear wheel, and cover it to make it harder to steal. Lock, chain, cover. The Met Police.
All right, it could be a solid Thursday for the equity market. Stock futures, they are up 219 on the Dow. Similar gains on the S&P and the NASDAQ. The U.S. and China reportedly set to resume high-level and face-to-face trade talks. We will take you back to Washington with more on the news that is moving markets when Worldwide Exchange returns right after this.
Did someone say winter sun? It's that time again, and this year at Jet2 Holidays, we're saying Cyprus. On this incredible island, you get it all. A choice of 4- and 5-star hotels, amazing ancient ruins for culture-packed days out, hiking and cycling trails for active adventures, and plenty of blue flag beaches for soaking up that winter sun. Book Cyprus now with just a £60 deposit. Jet2 Holidays. Package holidays you can trust. APRA net or protected, subject to availability and conditions.
Strength and things. Strength and things. Strength and things. Strings and things. Strings and things and strings and things. Strings and things. Strings and things. Strings and
Now there's a whole range of strings and things called strings and things, including cheese strings, yollies, and new cheese shapes. Find them all in the cheese and yogurt aisle.
Strings and things.
I didn't choose you, you chose me. When you broke from the crowd and pawed at my knee, soon you'll be feeling right at home. You'll be a bit unsure, but you're free to roam. What's good to chew? What's nice to nibble? Wet food, dry food, tin food, kibble? You might sometimes be cheeky, not always wise, but I know I found love in those puppy dog eyes. Join the free VIP Puppy Club from Pets at Home for advice and exclusive offers, including 10% off your first shop in store. Visit petsathome.com/puppy club or join in store. T's and C's apply.
Make sure you're uni ready with our huge range of practical essentials and home from home comforts and get 10% off for a limited time. T's and C's and exclusions apply. Dunelm, the home of homes.
Millions of people are missing out by having a current account that doesn't pay them any interest on their hard-earned money. TSB offers interest to all their Plus account customers for no monthly fee. Plus, you can stop your friends and family missing out by recommending the Plus account to them. And when they switch, you'll both earn £75. Search online or visit your local branch. Terms and conditions apply.
Right now, you can get Sky TV and cinema together in HD for a show-stopping £31 a month. There's something for everyone. Watch laugh out loud comedy, award-winning dramas, and the latest blockbusters like A Star Is Born. Plus, enjoy a brand new premiere every day. Get Sky TV and cinema together in HD for an amazing £31 a month. Search Sky TV today. Offer ends September 12th, 18-month minimum terms. Prices may change during this period. Set up £20 new customers, up to 219 existing. Further terms apply.
A trade truce. New reports that China and the United States set to get back to the table and talk tariffs, but the White House remains tight-lipped. Can the two sides really get anything done this time? That news sending futures higher as Wall Street gets ready for what could be back-to-back days of gains in what is traditionally the worst month for stocks. And one of the world's most exclusive clubs may be getting smaller. CEO David Solomon reportedly looking to cut the number of Goldman Sachs partners. It is Thursday, September 5th, and you're watching Worldwide Exchange on CNBC. And good morning, and thanks for being with us on CNBC. It is 5:28 a.m. Eastern Time exactly, and here's how your money and investments look right now as we are just about halfway through this 5 a.m. hour. Stock futures, they are way up. Dow futures indicated up 225 points, similar percentage gains for the S&P and the NASDAQ on those reports, which we'll get to with Eamon Javers in just a minute as stock futures go up. We're actually bonds sell a little bit. Benchmark 10-year note yield, though, is still very low, but back above 1.5%. So 1.51 for the 10-year note. What will we do with these sky-high yields, he says tongue-in-cheek. Let's get a check on the Asian markets now as well. Because remember, yesterday we had that huge rally in Hong Kong stocks, one of the best days in years, on news that extradition bill that some of the protesters were upset by would be permanently shelved. A little bit of a reversal down very, very fractionally here. But Japan, maybe on those trade headlines, rising nicely. The Nikkei up 2%. Let's find out what else is happening in the European trade, if they are kind of following our markets as well, because they got their own stuff going on in the United Kingdom in particular. We are seeing every market but the UK rise. The UK with just more Brexit drama, maybe another general election. Hey, maybe another prime minister in the UK already. That market down about 0.5%. The rest of the markets in the green. All right, let's get more now on that top story. Cooling U.S. trade tensions, delivering that boost to the markets. Negotiators from China and the United States reportedly are set to resume talks as soon as next month. Key word there, reportedly. Eamon Javers joining us now live from Washington with more. Where Eamon, I know as you've gone around the world following these trade negotiations and everything else, you're not going to believe it until the two sides are eyeballing each other sitting across from a table.
Yeah, actually, that's right, Brian. We heard this, date of September. Now we're hearing October for the two sides to actually sit down face to face. Here's how it unfolded last night. We got the statement from the Chinese Foreign Ministry saying that, in fact, the two sides are going to meet. They say there was a phone call between Lighthizer and Mnuchin and the Chinese side, and officials agreed to hold the next round of talks in Washington in early October, the Chinese side says. They say they agreed to work together and take practical actions. Later in the evening last night, a U.S. trade representative spokesman confirmed that to me with a slightly different nuance. Here's the U.S. trade representative's statement from last night, not necessarily specific about that October date, but saying Ambassador Lighthizer and Secretary Mnuchin spoke with Vice Premier Liu He of China on Wednesday night regarding U.S.-China trade talks. They agreed to hold meetings at the ministerial level in Washington in the coming weeks. In advance of these discussions, deputy-level meetings will take place in mid-September to lay the groundwork for meaningful progress. So the U.S. side, Brian, is saying that they're going to have these lower-level meetings in mid-September and then a higher-level meeting just in the coming weeks, not specifically suggesting that they're going to meet in October, but suggesting that all of these officials on the U.S. side would like to make sure that the groundwork is laid for what they call meaningful progress before they move to a principles-level meeting. And that could happen in October, but the U.S. side not specifying that. So where are we? Well, this will be the first face-to-face meeting that the two sides have had since the president raised those tariffs on September 1st and committed to raising even more in December. We'll see whether they can undo this sort of Gordian knot of tariffs and trade.
So we got to wait basically for the meeting before the big meeting. That's effectively what we are waiting for.
The Chinese side talked about sort of one meeting. The U.S. side is talking about a series of meetings escalating up the hierarchy, assuming things go well. But we don't know what the sort of threshold is for the U.S. to commit to that higher level of meeting. What do they mean by meaningful progress? We don't know yet as we sit here right now.
Well, whatever it is, the meeting before the meeting before the meeting, the markets like it because Dow futures are up about 200 points right now. Eamon Javers, thank you very much.
You bet, Brian.
Well, for more of the U.S.-China trade tensions, we are now joined by Stephen Myro, Beacon Policy Advisors, a former senior official at the U.S. Treasury Department and the U.S. Import-Export Bank. And Stephen is out with a new editorial this week saying that hawks in Washington speak of decoupling, while Chinese Premier Xi Jinping is already doing that his way. Stephen, welcome to Worldwide Exchange. Thanks for joining us. Is this a world we act like, from our side, that China needs us a lot more than we need them? Do you believe that? From your editorial, doesn't sound like you do.
Well, Brian, I think the important thing here is what do the Chinese think? And Xi Jinping has definitely taken a more aggressive posture since taking over in China. And I think President Trump has helped them get to the point that they want to accelerate what they call their Made in 2025 program, which helps them to become more self-sufficient. And he's just moving quicker along that path.
Yesterday, Mark Cuban, the owner of the Mavericks, obviously billionaire, well-known to our audience, he tweeted out something, I think it was yesterday or the day before, where basically he said businesses and even countries sort of find markets, and I'm summarizing. In other words, if China doesn't have us as a market because of tariffs, they're going to go find the market somewhere else. They're going to sell stuff to Germany or Australia or Japan, wherever it might be. Do you think that China right now is actively looking perhaps to, as you say, decouple and find new markets and say, well, okay, United States, if you don't want our stuff, we'll sell it to somebody else?
So one of the most important things in the near term to President Trump is try to get China to start buying soybeans again from the United States. Of course, because it helps the farmers, which are a key component of Trump's political base. But they haven't been buying many soybeans from us at all, and they've been buying them from Brazil. Of course, whoever's been buying them from Brazil has to go looking elsewhere. We live in a globalized world, Brian. This isn't, when people talk about a Cold War between the U.S. and China, this is not a Cold War like we had between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, where we lived in basically two separate economies. So, of course, you pull on a string somewhere, it's gonna have an effect elsewhere.
But they are connected. I mean, we buy a lot more stuff from China than they buy with us. I think that's obviously part of the problem, Stephen. Do you think, though, we could have a world in a decade or 5 years or 50 years where there literally are sort of two sets of economies? There's the Chinese model, and then there's the U.S. model, and the two are not linked. Or do we eventually have to get down to business because globally business is always going to be connected?
I personally believe, Brian, that it's impossible to decouple, but that doesn't mean they're not going to try. So when I explain it to our clients at Beacon Policy Advisors, what I say is you got to think about this as almost trying to do brain surgery. You think how interconnected all the neurons and the different parts of the brain are. And when you're trying to undo all those pieces, you're inevitably going to have very messy consequences.
You know, but if let's say you're buying a house, right? And you want the house, the sellers, and you can't quite come to a price, but the sellers want to sell and you want to buy. And so the idea of the negotiation is that you're going to, you know, maybe play hardball, but ultimately both parties want the same thing. They want the house to sell and we can move in. Do you think, A, Stephen, that the two sides want the same thing? And B, do you think that maybe in some ways our negotiating tactic, this hardlinism with a Chinese culture that is very, very set on preserving what they call face and being perceived as sort of being an equal party in this negotiation is counterproductive?
Oh, it's extremely counterproductive, Brian. Having negotiated with the Chinese both in and out of government, the concept of face is so important. And to keep, you know, to one day call Xi Jinping the enemy and then the next day say he's my best friend, they don't flip around as easily as we do. And, you know, the interesting thing about China and a lot of countries in Asia is that once they decide to write you off, you can't get them back, but they're not going to necessarily say no. They're just not going to say yes. So that's when we saw this announcement of the expected meetings in October, I kind of let out a big yawn because this is just going to be a lot of meeting and head nodding. But I'm very, very skeptical that we'll get any true movement or momentum out of it.
Well, the market's moving, Stephen, so you think it's an overreaction to the upside?
Yeah, the market is still in love with this concept of a Trump put. They believe that because of the election, Trump needs to cut a deal. The problem is he can't cut a deal with himself. He needs someone on the other side willing to shake a hand. And I just don't believe that Xi Jinping is willing to do a deal with Donald Trump anymore.
All right, Stephen Myro, really interesting op-ed there. China finds it can live without the United States. Stephen, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Brian.
Well, it's not just trade on investor minds, although that is certainly a big deal. Wall Street also waiting policy decisions from key central banks all over the world, starting with the ECB next week. And oh, by the way, our Federal Reserve coming up in less than 2 weeks. Joining us now is Joe Brusuelas, chief economist at RSMUS. Before we get into all that central bank stuff, you know, Stephen Myro just saying that he thinks, you know, the two sides need each other, and ultimately there's got to be something done. But the tactic we're using in trade and the negotiations is counterproductive. Would you agree with that?
No, I would. And that image of the Trump administration conducting brain surgery frightens the heck out of me, Brian. I mean, they are so clumsy around trade. It's frightening.
Well,
I mean,
it feels like more of a hammer than a scalpel.
Yeah, I would say it's, you know, like dropping an anvil on a tsetse fly. You're going to kill the fly, but you're going to shatter the table, right? So when I see the market reaction this morning, I agree with him. It's a bit of a knee-jerk reaction. This rally is going to be faded because of the risks around the payroll report tomorrow. Look, no trade deal, no re-election. It's that simple at this point.
You think it matters that much?
No, I do, because you can see the manufacturing contraction begin to roll around the world, spilled over in the United States over the past 2 months. The soft data is now aligned with the hard data. Our manufacturing sector's, contracting. Look, what he needs to do is declare victory and go home. Rejoin the TPP.
Really, the Trans-Pacific Partnership?
That's right.
You think so?
Well, the USMCA or NAFTA modernization, 71% of it is just what we imported from the TPP. He might as well go back to it. Then he can approach the Chinese with 40% of global GDP, economically encircle them, and engage them in a structural impediments talk, which will then yield benefits over probably a longer term.
But it feels like we are farther away, Joe, than we were a year ago.
No,
honestly,
we are.
It feels that way because the rhetoric is ramped up. The tariffs keep getting added on. They're not getting subtracted. They're getting worse, not better.
Well, that's right, because we've lost those markets. Those soy markets aren't going to come back. You know, Brazil's going to own that, right? The lost residential investment due to the uncertainty tax, and then the retaliation. Look, it's spilling over in the U.S. real economy. We can now see this in the data. The White House is a lot of things, but dumb isn't one of them. They see this. That's why I think they're going to want to sue for a deal as soon as possible to extract themselves from a corner in which Mr. Trump's negotiated himself into.
And the trade deal, Joe, and Brexit feel very similar in a sense that the process almost feels worse than the outcome. I had compared Brexit. It's like when the actual thing occurs, if it does, there might be some relief because the process, the multi-year process, the fighting, if you will, right, has been maybe worse for the economy and confidence in the UK and even Europe than the actual end game.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? The daily back and forth is finally just going to wear out the consumer to the point where they're like, what the heck is going on?
Well, you're spot on this. It's the uncertainty tax that's stamping business investment here in the United States due to Mr. Trump's trade policies. Over there, it's the existential question of who are we? Are we English or are we Europeans? Right? And that uncertainty tax has damped consumer spending, which is flat. That's why the UK economy is teetering on the edge of a recession. They need to extract themselves from that as soon as possible. If not, they're going to be flat. We produce a Brexit index, Brexit stress index.
That's why I didn't just ask randomly because that you got the RSM Brexit stress index, and I know they are stressed out.
They are stressed out. We reached the highs just after the referendum, 2 standard deviations above neutral. That means that they are going to have likely flat growth at best for the remainder of the year.
See, the damage may have been done. It's like the fighting, the outcome is not even the big deal anymore.
That's right.
We might look back at this in history and realize that the process was the problem.
Classic
not the outcome.
lose propositions.
Joe, thank you very much. Good analysis. Appreciate it as always. All right, coming up. As Dorian gains strength, the business community in the Carolinas is getting ready. They are boarding up and battening down the hatches. But what about those who literally work on the water? Jim Newsom, CEO of the South Carolina Port Authority, will join us next with what to expect as the monster storm rages on. Stick around.
I can find and fund my car, from a Mini to a Jaguar.
Feel good car buying from findandfundmycar.com is the place where you can find quality used cars from trusted dealers rated by you, and where you can fund your car with finance to fit your budget. It's feel good car buying all in one place.
Carry on, choose findandfundmycar.com.
At Tesco, we can pop our pasta in your Astra, our red Leicester in your Fiesta, or our mayo in your Mondeo. All you need to do is try click and collect. Just go to tesco.com, order your shopping, then click and collect. With the minimum basket spend now only £25. And if you fancy something a little more exotic, we can even put our pad thai in your Qashqai. Try click and collect at tesco.com. Every little helps. Selected larger stores. Booking charge may apply. See online for full terms and conditions.
This one shouldn't take long. Of course, if it had a cover, I might not be bothered. Can't see what's under there. And then they'd have chained the back wheel. It would have taken me much longer, especially if the chain's off the ground. Makes it harder to cut. This one doesn't even have a lock on the front. So, in the time I've been talking to you, I've nicked it.
Over 9,000 scooters and motorbikes were stolen in London last year. Lock your bike, chain the rear wheel, and cover it to make it harder to steal. Lock, chain, cover. The Met Police.
I'm getting strawberry notes and a flutter of sweetness without adding sugar. Clever. It is. Yazoo Kids uses a lactose-reduced milk that enhances flavour without adding sugar or artificial sweeteners. Milky deliciousness and packed full of goodness. Very clever. Strawberry Yazoo Kids supports change for life. Yazoo, shake it up! Contains naturally occurring sugars. Milk is a source of calcium, which is needed for the maintenance of normal bones.
$70 billion. That is how much UBS predicts natural disasters will cost insurers this year. $25 billion right now, the expected cost of Dorian, most powerful storm to hit the Atlantic since 1935. And residents and businesses from Florida to the Carolinas, they've been making preparations for Dorian for days now. South Carolina, the Ports Authority has shut operations in both Charlestown and Georgetown, but expects to be back up and running, hopefully by the weekend. Joining us down the CBC Newsline is Jim Newsom, CEO of the South Carolina Port Authority. And Jim, we appreciate it. What is the current status of the port and your workers?
Well, good morning, Brian. We shut the port at about 8 o'clock on Tuesday night, and under direction of the Coast Guard, all the ships left. So then we secured the terminal, which is tying the cranes and the lift machines down and lashing empty containers together because they're the most dangerous in the wind. So right now, obviously, the port's closed. We're just waiting it out, and we're going to start opening operations tomorrow morning, about 9 o'clock, and hopefully work the first ships at 1900 tomorrow night. They have to survey the harbor, make sure all the buoys are in place when the storm passes.
Are you that confident that you can kind of get back up and running in some fashion by tomorrow night, Jim, given the size of this storm?
Well, you're never confident. I mean, you make all the preparations that you can. I mean, our team is very experienced at these types of things. I think we've had 3 of these events in the last 4 years, but you're more hopeful than confident. I mean, we have a good plan, and good infrastructure, which we, build intentionally with hurricanes in mind. So we always hope for the best.
Yeah, and we've obviously done our show from your port, and you look at the scenes of Dorian in the Bahamas, Jim, and that storm was moving some heavy gear around. I mean, you see tractor trailer trucks that have been blown away, boats now that are sort of inland. Take us through the safety preparations, all those giant ships and heavy boxes. How do you literally protect that from 100-mile-an-hour winds?
Well, the first safety measure, obviously, is that the Coast Guard orders ships out of the harbor, and they've got a logical progression by which they do that. And that worked extremely well in this case because the storm was slow moving and the path seemed pretty predictable. So that was all done in a very orderly way. And then the main thing to do is to tie down our container cranes. So we've got locking pins in the wharf, which actually metal projectiles go into the wharf, and then we've got hurricane tie downs. They're Cat 5 rated. I mean, each crane, and you've been on top of them, I mean, they weigh about 2,000 tons each, so it's important to keep them locked down. And we have a procedure for doing that. Loaded containers are typically the least of the worry because they're heavy, and so we try to level those stacks and tie every rubber tire gantry crane with a container. And the empty containers, we lash them all together in a big block with nylon straps. And in our technology, we cover it. Hopefully it doesn't get wet. I mean, I think the big issue will be power, and making sure that is, gets back in time. We test all the technology. As you know, we do about 8,000 truck transactions a day in a normal day. Mm-hmm. We did about 4,500 on Tuesday in anticipation of being closed for a few days. So I think we're as ready as we can be.
And I'm guessing, because I've seen your control rooms there, Jim, that you guys have access to probably a lot of really good weather data that maybe the general public does not have. What are you guys hearing about the storm?
Well, I think it's, this path has been pretty predictable. It's strengthened a little bit, which was obviously a concern. It's going to, I think the next 10 or 12 hours here are going to be the most difficult. Flooding seems to be the major issue, but I can tell you it's windy here. I mean, we live in a building, and it certainly is plenty windy. But again, our team is used to doing this. I mean, they do it, very professionally, and I think that we just hope for the best, hope for it to pass, and that we can get back in operation, and that everybody stays safe. Obviously, the safety of our staff and people in the community is the first order of business.
It certainly is, and you guys are doing it well. Closed, hoping to reopen tomorrow night. Jim, thinking about you guys down there. For everybody, workers and all the people around, be safe. It's a big storm. We appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right. Well, it is not just the Port of Charleston, North Carolina, taking similar actions. Both the ports of Wilmington and Morehead City, North Carolina, will be closed today and tomorrow, with updates and opening later on Friday. So a lot of businesses taking action ahead of Dorian. All right, on deck. Going slack, weak guidance from the hot startup. Will the office messaging software be able to communicate well enough to investors to get that stock to rebound? It's down 12% right now. Plus, a world of risk. Protests in Hong Kong, the ongoing trade war, Brexit, so much more. Your guest will weigh in on the biggest risks right now and how to balance them out when we come back.
ServiceNow put our workflows in the cloud. This changes everything.
I can find and fund my Jaguar.
Feel good car buying from findandfundmycar.com is the place where you can find quality used cars from trusted dealers rated by you, and where you can fund your car with finance to fit your budget. It's feel good car buying, all in one place.
Carry on, choose findandfundmycar.com.
At Tesco, we can pop our pasta in your Astra, our red Leicester in your Fiesta, or our mayo in your Mondeo. All you need to do is try click and collect. Just go to tesco.com, order your shopping, then click and collect. With the minimum basket spend now only £25. And if you fancy something a little more exotic, we can even put our pad thai in your Qashqai. Try click and collect at tesco.com. Every little helps. Selected larger stores. Booking charge may apply. See online for full terms and conditions.
This one shouldn't take long. Of course, if it had a cover, I might not be bothered. Can't see what's under there. And then they'd have chained the back wheel. It would have taken me much. Especially if the chain's off the ground. Makes it harder to cut. This one doesn't even have a lock on the front. So, in the time I've been talking to you, I've nicked it.
Over 9,000 scooters and motorbikes were stolen in London last year. Lock your bike, chain the rear wheel, and cover it to make it harder to steal. Lock, chain, cover. The Met Police.
Slack CEO, first on CNBC. How the company is connecting with employees and investors. The numbers and reactions since going public. Squawk Box today.
There's so much uncertainty and concern, volatility, the trade and tariff wars, all this noise that's going on.
What are you doing in the portfolios you manage right now?
The advice we're giving our clients is now just grin and bear it. Don't change your long-term investment strategy because of short-term fears. In fact, what you should be doing is dollar cost averaging into this marketplace.
If I take out a home equity line of credit, does it hurt my credit score?
It doesn't necessarily hurt your credit score, but it does potentially impact your ability to get other debt later.
5:52. Seems like a good time for your executive recap. All the headlines you need in about 60 seconds. Let's do this. At least a dozen Goldman Sachs partners are reportedly negotiating their exits from the firm. The Wall Street Journal says Goldman CEO David Solomon feels the bank's upper ranks are simply too bloated. Also right now, an internal probe at Nissan reportedly finding CEO Hiroto Saikawa and other executives received excess compensation in violation of company rules. Saikawa is apologizing and promising to return any improperly paid funds. He says all this happened under a scheme designed by the ousted chairman, Carlos Ghosn. The automaker's board set to meet later on this month to consider disciplinary action. And shares of Slack, they are down big right now, off 13% following its first quarterly report as a public company. Those results topping estimates, but Slack is forecasting a bigger than expected loss and slowing revenue growth in the current quarter. And that is what sent the stock falling. By the way, don't miss the company's CEO on Squawk Box Live at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. General Motors CEO Mary Barra is set to meet with President Trump at the White House today. White House officials say a variety of issues are on the table, including trade, contract talks, and revising fuel efficiency standards. Meantime, a couple of analyst calls to note this morning. Comcast, we've heard of them, upgraded to outperform from Perform at Oppenheimer with a $54 price target. That's about $8 of upside from here. Among the catalysts seen, the analyst points to broadband strength, advertising revenues, secular improvements in cable, and by the way, Comcast is our parent company. Lyft initiated with Deutsche Bank at the buy rating, and get this, a $70 price target. The analyst thinks the stock may be coming out. It's got about 4 reasons why they are optimistic on Lyft. By the way, 70 is a price that we only saw for about a day directly after the IPO. The stock's at $47. It has been a tough ride as a public company for Lyft. All right, now back to the macro markets and your money. Stock futures, they continue to gain strength, up about 245 points right now on optimism that trade talks may resume. But we've been here before. Joining us now is Dan Veru, Executive VP and CIO of Palisade Capital Management. And yes, we have been here before. By the way, we got to stop meeting like this, Dan. I mean, in 20 years, we've been doing this together. There's always something going on. There's never this calm world, but these are big things. Trade, Brexit, global possible recessions. It does feel like more of a risky time than maybe any time in a decade. I think that's an overstatement. So how do you manage investments through this time of really sort of huge risks.
I try to do no harm and take the Hippocratic Oath, because sometimes you'll want to react to the day's news. You'll want to buy when you think when things are really good, like today, and you'll want to sell when it looks like there's no bottom in sight. Really, what you just have to do is stick with some principles around companies that you really like. Stick with quality, particularly right now. And
that's easier said than done when we got images of people throwing Molotov cocktails in Hong Kong and the police attacking protesters, and we might have another prime minister in the UK in just a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
It's hard to stay chill.
That's right. That's right. And the way, but again, if you can come back to some centralized financial themes or metrics, and the one we like the most is return on invested capital. When we look back 5, 10, 15, 20 years, that seems to be the metric that outperforms in all different kinds of markets.
So where are you finding this return on invested capital these days?
Well, you know, software companies have a lot of it, but a lot of what we would call industrial technology companies that look to deploy capital as efficiently as they possibly can, and always are looking at reducing the amount of capital that they put into their businesses. Those are all companies that generate a lot of cash and have the ability to take advantage of dislocations in the marketplace by making acquisitions at much more advantageous prices. They can take advantage of the situations that you have, particularly when there's turmoil.
So it sounds like technology of various kinds, you believe, is kind of a port in the storm, so to speak.
Well, you know, it's very interesting because we think of industrials, you think of Caterpillar, Deere, you know, those the deeper cyclical type of businesses, but there's a whole cohort of companies that really are technology-like in their approach to running a business. And those are the companies that we want to stick with. And those are the types of businesses that are focused on those principles. And again, return on invested capital, to me, is the report card for the CEO.
And I'm going to kind of dial it to the industry I cover, which is oil and gas. I mean, is that why people have just completely, like, literally left oil and gas stocks out to die? Because many oil and gas names, their valuations are trading at the same level as when oil was at $15 and $20 per barrel, but nobody seems to care.
You know, we were just looking at Devon Energy the other day. The stock is where it was today when oil was $20, $21
Exactly
a
my
barrel.
point. I had no idea you were going to say that. Exactly my point.
Exactly. So we don't own any of those companies.
But not, so you don't find the valuation yet attractive enough, even though some of these valuations are at all-time lows.
Energy has so many things going against it and one thing going for it. The only thing it's got going for it is higher prices more recently off of the 2015, 2016 lows. But what they have against them is a whole host of issues. You know, an emerging class of investors that just don't want to own carbon-based businesses at all at any valuation, and a less disciplined industry in terms of how they allocate capital simply does not exist.
And a lot of debt, which we'll be doing more of on this fine network next week. I just have a feeling, since I'm working on something. Dan,
okay, great.
It was a real pleasure to get you on. Thank you very much.
Great to be here.
I appreciate that, guys. Good discussion with Dan. So no RBI this morning. The random but interesting will return tomorrow. We are seeing stock futures. They're up 250. There's a lot to talk about with a bunch of big interviews on Squawk Box, which, by the way, begins in about 3 seconds. We'll see you tomorrow on Worldwide Exchange. Have a great day.
That's about right. Pretty close. Good morning. Let's talk. In October, China says it's agreed to meet with U.S. trade negotiators next month. Futures jumping on that news. Online messaging company Slack disappointing the street in its first report as a public company. Shares are sharply lower. We're going to have the first interview with the company's CEO. And Goldman Sachs reportedly trimming the fat in its upper ranks. We'll tell you why some top partners are on their way out. It's Thursday, September 5th, 2019, and Squawk Box begins right now.
Live from New York, where business never sleeps, this is Squawk Box.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Squawk Box here on CNBC. We are live from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. I'm Becky Quick, along with Joe Kernan and Andrew Ross Sorkin. Been watching the U.S. equity futures this morning, and they're indicated quite a bit higher after this news that it looks like the trade talks are back on for October with China. Dow futures right now indicated up by about 250 points. This comes after a big day of gains yesterday for the market, with the Dow up more than 230 points. And the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ both are racing their losses from Tuesday. So we'll see where things head as we get a little closer to the open. Right now, the S&P has indicated up another 26 points. It already closed at its highest level since August 8th yesterday. And the NASDAQ right now up by about 93 points. At least that's the indication if we were to open right here. Take a look at the Treasury market. Let's see where the 10-year yield is at this point. It looks like a 1.52%, so it's back above 1.5%. 2-year is just below that at 1.478%, and then the 30-year sitting just above 2% at 2.02%. Overnight in China, take a look at those stocks, and you're going to see that the Nikkei was up by about 2%, 2.1%. In Shanghai, market there up by about 1%, and Hang Seng closed flat. And then if you're looking at what's been happening in Europe with some of the early trading that's taking place this morning, you will also see mostly green arrows there. CAC up by about 0.9%, so is the DAX. The FTSE is down by just over 0.5%.
And CNBC has you covered for all of the big global stories that are moving markets today. We're going to take you to Hong Kong for the latest comments from leader Carrie Lam. We're going to bring you an update on the political crisis in the UK over Brexit. We've got an exclusive update on the tariff fallout for small retailers. But let's start in Washington right now with the big news, I should say, that is moving the markets right now, and that is trade talks with China set to resume next month. Eamon, what do you got here?
Yeah, that's right, Andrew. The news breaking first last night out of Beijing, the foreign ministry issuing a statement. Here's the CNBC translation of the foreign ministry statement from China last night, saying that they confirmed a phone call between leaders that took place this week, and they say that officials have now agreed to hold the next round of talks in early October. That's expected to be in Washington, D.C. Now, look at the difference here, though, between this statement where they say they've agreed to work together and take practical actions, and the U.S. statement that I got from a spokesperson for the USTR last night. This is a slightly different statement. They're saying, the USTR is saying Ambassador Lighthizer and Secretary Mnuchin spoke with Vice Premier Liu He of China on Wednesday night regarding U.S.-China trade talks. They agreed to hold meetings at the ministerial level in Washington in the coming weeks. In advance of these discussions, deputy-level meetings will take place in mid-September to lay the groundwork for meaningful progress. So the U.S. statement, more nuanced than the Chinese statement, Andrew, saying that there's going to be 2 tiers of meetings. The deputy level is going to be the first tier that's going to happen in the coming weeks. And then if that lays the groundwork for what they call meaningful progress, then they'll go forward with the ministerial level meetings. That could be in October. The U.S. statement not committing to a specific date or even a specific month. The Chinese statement saying that the meeting will be in October. So it seems like the U.S., if you read this, the U.S. side, Mnuchin, Lighthizer, perhaps a little bit more cautious here than Liu He, the Chinese vice premier who's been leading these negotiations on the Chinese side. The U.S. side seems just a little bit more reticent to commit to anything here.
Explain this, the motivation for being more cautious on the U.S. side. What is that about? Or to the extent you believe that the Chinese are being more aggressive?
Well, that's where you're into reading the tea leaves, and beyond reading the tea leaves into speculation, right? I mean, we don't know ultimately why the difference is, but I think it's striking that you get the Chinese side saying October and the U.S. side not committing to October. I pushed an official on that last night, right after this news broke, and the official not going beyond at all what was in the 4 corners of the statement issued by USTR.
I can tell you that the president thinks that China wants a deal very badly. I can just tell you that. He thinks that. And in this respect, I think they're kind of like saying, all right, but you remember April, and you had all these things you were going to do, and you didn't do any of them. Now you say you want to talk, fine, we'll talk. But it's if you're back to where you were in May, it's not going to be.
That statement was as much about
I think he's saying
as it was.
I think he thinks he's turning this. I think he's turning in his mind. I think he's turning the screws on China. Hey, that puts us past that October date. I think it's all coming true, Eamon, that she, with the nationalistic feelings that are going to be around at the early October in China, it wasn't going to happen before then. So that gets us past that point where, as Eunice has pointed out again and again and again, they're unlikely to look like they're, changing or compromising or giving Trump anything prior to that October.
And notice that neither side is giving us a specific date here, right? I mean, we're getting a month from the Chinese side. From the U.S. side, we're not even getting a month necessarily. So there's wiggle room here for this to be a little bit squishy. Remember, we were told that the meetings would take place in September, and U.S. officials until yesterday had been saying that they were still focused on meetings in September. Now we find out that those meetings are going to be at a lower level in September, and then if that works, they'll follow up with a ministerial level meeting at some point thereafter. So both sides seem to be leaving a little wiggle room here on the timing, and it's not clear at all what the U.S. side means by meaningful progress and laying the groundwork for that meaningful progress. So what are the tiers that they have to achieve in those lower level negotiations? We just don't know at this point.
It's
and when they say lower level negotiations, on our side, who's involved in that? Because remember, the last, quote, lower level...
It sounded like...
Mnuchin...
ministerial level would be...
Mnuchin, they left that meeting in China, what was it, a month or two ago?
Right, and that would be a ministerial level, right? The ministers would be, Mnuchin, Liu He, and presumably Lighthizer. Below that is staff at U.S. Trade Representative's office and perhaps some folks in from the National Economic Council
Look,
as well.
even at the ministerial level, you can't assume that any of these people are speaking for the two primaries. I mean, there are two people who are going to have to make this decision.
And there's no mention anywhere of that, right? The principals sitting down.
The trade war has been very tumultuous for everyone, and hopefully something good comes out of it. But in some ways, I'm going to miss where just the slightest comment can send us up 300 points. You know what I mean? It's like nothing happened, and but on the flip side, I know it can send us down 800. But there are days where it's like, wow, that doesn't seem like a lot. We're up.
We spent a lot of time trying to figure out what's going on inside these negotiations, right? I mean, remember when we were in France last week, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out what the president was talking about in terms of 2 phone calls from China. The president suggested that those happened. White House didn't offer any details on who called who or what exactly happened there. But that was enough to move markets, too. Just the possible mention of a couple of phone calls.
The letter of the law and the spirit of the law. Obviously, maybe there were some overtures going on somewhere, and... who knows what this? Who knows how positive this actually is?
The interesting thing that happened yesterday, I thought, was this. The big question around all this is: could this trade war expand from just tariffs into a broader economic confrontation between these two sides? The president was asked yesterday if he was concerned at all about the Chinese going after U.S. debt, that is the Treasury market, because of their vast holdings of Treasuries, right, and selling those and to hurt the U.S. economy. And the president gave a long answer, and which was interesting, but I think the important thing out of his answer was the president doesn't believe the Chinese have the power to do that because he believes there's enormous global demand for U.S. debt, and so therefore the Chinese wouldn't be able to sell treasuries. So the president is pretty confident here from his wording yesterday that there are some guardrails on this, and it's not going to spill over into a wider confrontation. That gives you, I think, an interesting insight into his mindset as you go into these lower-level negotiations.
We were worrying they were going to dump debt when it was, 100 basis points higher across the whole yield curve, or 200 basis points higher. What are they going to do? And then rates are going to go up. So,
right.
I mean, it's
a move by the Chinese that would hurt them as much as it would hurt us.
They could dump it into this quote unquote demand. So the whole thing.
I don't think and Japan surpassed them already. Right.
Eamon, appreciate it. We're going to continue this conversation right now. Joining us to talk about the reaction in the markets, Terry Spath, the Chief Investment Officer at CR Investment Management. Drew Mattis is joining us this morning as well, Chief Strategist at MetLife Investment Management. Try to read the tea leaves. There's the market piece, and by the way, we look at these market gyrations. But in boardrooms across America, both in big corporations and also small businesses, they're trying to read these tea leaves in a very different way, which is to say, if they have business in China, they're thinking, am I really moving? How quickly am I moving? Am I staying? Am I going? What am I doing?
Well, and the same's going on in boardrooms in China. Right, so this is affecting both, and I think both leaders are coming to a conclusion that it's best to get this behind us. But you're right; it's got to for there to be progress, there has to be give on both sides, and for there to be give on both sides, we have to get past the anniversary in September of the Chinese government. So you need to get past that point so everyone can kind of begin to come together and give a little bit on both sides.
Terry, how are you playing this?
Well,
to the extent you are.
Yeah, to the extent that we are. I mean, as Joe pointed out, you can have a 300-point move just from any small piece of information, and that volatility that's come into the market is just creating such a state of confusion. I mean, between what the stock market is saying, touching new highs, and the bond market, sending a very different message with that inversion of the yield curve. So I think there's going to continue to be a lot of volatility. So we're not pushing chips on the table. We're fully invested, but looking at that risk very, very closely.
You're on a different side, though.
Well, I actually think things in the U.S. still look good. I think,
from what I've been reading, you've been more skeptical.
More skeptical on
not just broadly on what's going to happen in the markets this year.
Yeah, I just think that we're in a period where people are focused on the risks and not focused on the fundamentals. And whenever that's the case, you can have long periods where people just are not responding to the good news or responding to the negative news. And it could be a decent period of time where we go through a process where everything that's good gets.
And what's positive news? Because if you get a China deal, you'd think that'd be positive news.
China deal is positive. It depends on what the deal actually looks like. So this is a case where everyone gets excited, and then it comes back, and it turns out it's some low-level meeting that doesn't actually accomplish anything, and then everyone gets disappointed again. You actually need to see a resolution of some of these risks. It doesn't matter what the resolution necessarily is. It just needs to be finished.
If you think there's going to be as much volatility as you're planning, why be fully invested? Why not sit with something ready to go on these down days and either?
Right. Well, I think a healthy dose of skepticism always makes a lot of sense. But we're in a situation now where the bond market is shouting very loudly that they're expecting something very bad. And I think it's a mistake to ignore that. And so, what I think is a really interesting period of time right now is we're seeing people own bonds for capital appreciation, own stocks for the income on that. And so, with that type of environment, we don't want to be too risk on, but at the same time, the trends are still positive. There's still a lot of uncertainty, and so we're comfortable being invested.
Are bond investors smarter than equity investors?
I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying that they're smart one way or the other, but I do think that the difference in messages is something to pay attention to because they're pretty different right now, and they have been now for a couple of months.
Okay, we're going to leave the conversation there. Terry, Drew, thank you guys.
Thank you.
When we return, global flashpoints. We're going to take you to Hong Kong, where we have some new comments from leader Carrie Lam. Also, new plans for weekend protests. And we have a live report from London, where the political crisis over Brexit is escalating. Right now, take a look at shares of Slack. We're going to talk more about the company's disappointing quarterly report. That stock down by almost 13%. We'll also bring you a first on CNBC interview with the company's CEO. Right now, as we head to a break, let's take a look at the biggest pre-market winners and losers in the Dow. Looks like Cisco is leading the way. It's up 1.5%.
I can find and fund my car, from a Mini to a Jaguar.
Feel good car buying from findandfundmycar.com is the place where you can find quality used cars from trusted dealers rated by you, and where you can fund your car with finance to fit your budget. It's feel good car buying all in one place.
Shouldn't be a carry on, choose findandfundmycar.com.
At Tesco, we can pop our pasta in your Astra, our red Leicester in your Fiesta, or our mayo in your Mondeo. All you need to do is try click and collect. Just go to tesco.com, order your shopping, then click and collect. With the minimum basket spend now only £25. And if you fancy something a little more exotic, we can even put our pad thai in your Qashqai. Try click and collect at tesco.com. Every little helps. Selected larger stores. Booking charge may apply. See online for full terms and conditions.
This one shouldn't take long. Of course, if it had a cover, I might not be bothered. Can't see what's under there. And then they'd have chained the back wheel. It would have taken me much longer, especially if the chain's off the ground. Makes it harder to cut. This one doesn't even have a lock on the front. So, in the time I've been talking to you, I've nicked it.
Over 9,000 scooters and motorbikes were stolen in London last year. Lock your bike, chain the rear wheel, and cover it to make it harder to steal. Lock, chain, cover. The Met Police.
Strength and things. Strength and things. Strength and things. Strings and things. Strings and things and strings and things. Strings and things. Strings and things.
strings and things called strings and things, including cheese strings, yollies, and new cheese shapes. Find them all in the cheese and yogurt aisle.
Strings and things.
Welcome back, everybody. CNBC's reporters are spanning the globe this morning to bring you the latest on the trade war and the global flashpoints. We're going to go right now to Hong Kong, where new protests are being planned for the weekend. Let's get straight over to our reporter, Chris Lindsay, who's standing by. Thank you, Chris.
Hi, Becky. Yes, a dramatic U-turn for Carrie Lam, the embattled Hong Kong leader who has announced that she is withdrawing that extremely controversial extradition bill that sparked 3 months of protests, sending at times more than 1 million people to the streets here in Hong Kong. However, it's too soon to say if this will be enough to mollify protesters. You know, the news yesterday, it buoyed markets here in Hong Kong. The Hang Seng was up nearly 4 points, but investors might be a little too optimistic. Just hours after Lam made the announcement, protesters were back on the streets saying, hey, we've got more demands. Specifically, they went in front of a police station and said, you've got our cohorts who are locked up inside of here. Other protesters, more than 1,000 since the beginning of this protest movement. We want an amnesty for all of them. Then that's not all. We want you to step down, Carrie Lam. So this thing seems to be far from over. There are more scheduled protests coming up ahead in the next few days, over the next few weekends as well. So right now, this is not enough to satisfy this protest movement. Becky?
Chris, thank you very much. Again, Chris Livesay. Another global flashpoint this morning is in the UK. Some new developments in the political crisis over Brexit. Willem Marks joins us right now with more. Willem, good morning.
Hi, Becky. So Boris Johnson is 0 for 4 this week when it comes to parliamentary votes. Last night, not only was he defeated on the idea of blocking a no-deal Brexit for late October, something that opposition lawmakers wanted to see happen, he also then, in response to that, called for a fresh election and once again could not get the required number of votes to push that through. That leaves him painted slightly into a corner. The opposition leader, Jeremy Corbyn, saying he's not prepared to grant Boris Johnson a fresh election until this legislation that's currently working its way through the parliament behind me to block a no-deal Brexit in October is finalised and given the Queen's approval, perhaps as early as next week. At that point, we could see an election date being set, but it's unlikely to be until at least the back end of October, perhaps even after that, following, of course, that very, very crucial October 31st deadline that still remains in place and still has, frankly, some currency traders nervous. When you look at the pound over the last 48 hours, we've seen it strengthen significantly as that threat of no deal has slightly receded. But a lot of people I'm talking to saying it's not entirely off the table, certainly not in the long term, guys.
Just one of many things that we have to keep watching. Willem, thank you. Willem Marks.
All right, coming up next, we're going to talk about the trade war fallout. We'll have an exclusive report on the impact of the tariffs on some small American businesses. Later, Mark Mobius will join us to cover the volatility in the markets. He's got some interesting thoughts about low interest rates and equity prices. I think it may be kind of a keep it simple, stupid idea. Right. Stocks might do better. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that helps for us. Squawk Box will be right back.
Feel-good car buying from findandfundmycar.com is the place where you can find quality used cars from trusted dealers rated by you and where you can fund your car with finance to fit your budget. It's feel-good car buying, all in one place.
At Tesco, we can pop our pasta in your Astra, our red Leicester in your Fiesta, or our mayo in your Mondeo. All you need to do is try click and collect. Just go to tesco.com, order your shopping, then click and collect. With the minimum basket spend now only £25. And if you fancy something a little more exotic, we can even put our pad thai in your Qashqai. Try click and collect at Tesco.com. Every little helps. Selected larger stores, booking charge may apply. See online for full terms and conditions.
This one shouldn't take long. Of course, if it had a cover, I might not be bothered. Can't see what's under there. And then they'd have chained the back wheel. It would have taken me much longer, especially if the chain's off the ground. Makes it harder to cut. This one doesn't even have a lock on the front. So, in the time I've been talking to you, I've nicked it.
Over 9,000 scooters and motorbikes were stolen in London last year. Lock your bike, chain the rear wheel, and cover it to make it harder to steal. Lock, chain, cover. The Met Police.
Strings and things. Strings and things. Strings and things. Strings and things. Strings and things and strings, strings, strings and things. Strings, strings, strings and things. Strings, strings, strings and things. Strings and
Now there's a whole range of strings and things called strings and things, including cheese strings, yollies, and new cheese shapes. Find them all in the cheese and yogurt aisle.
Strings and things.
From the moment I saw you, the last of the litter, I knew you were the one, and we'd soon hear the pitter-patter of tiny paws on our kitchen floor and tiny scratches on the bedroom door. You might sometimes be mischievous, sometimes be shy, but I know I found love in those kitten cat eyes. Join the free VIP Kitten Club from Pets at Home for advice and exclusive offers, including 10% off your first shop in store. Visit petsathome.com/kitten club or join in store. T's and C's apply.
Make sure you're uni ready with our huge range of practical essentials and home-from-home comforts and get 10% off for a limited time. T's and C's and exclusions apply. Dunelm, the home of homes.
Set for Life is the new game from the National Lottery where you can win 10 grand every month for 30 years. So go smash this month, next month, and make every month amazing. Play new Set for Life Mondays and Thursdays.
Set for Life from the National Lottery. Amazing starts here. Prize may be capped. Rules, procedures, and game-specific rules apply. Players must be 16 or over.
Time now for the Executive Edge, and we're taking a closer look at the impact of tariffs on smaller retailers, the ones that don't have the same negotiating power as giants like Walmart and Target. And Courtney Reagan joins us now with more of the little guys. Courtney.
Yeah, that's right, Joe. Believe it or not, more than 98% of U.S. retailers employ 50 people or less, which means about 40% of the country's retail employees work for what's considered a small business. This year, this is United Legwear, and this company does have 1,000 people employed directly, 200 people employed indirectly around the world, annual revenues of $500 million. It designs, manufactures, and licenses legwear and accessories for brands, including Puma, Champion, and Skechers. It does manufacture in a number of countries. China is the biggest.
We see that the tariffs are going to inevitably drive inflationary effects in the U.S. consumer base, as well as price increases at retail, and it's going to end up slowing down capacity needs, retail selling, and in turn will decrease our ability to build our employment base and continue to grow our employment base in the U.S.
Gold Medal International is an accessories wholesaler with $60 million in annual revenue volume, 50 employees manufacturing in 10 countries. China, also a significant portion of its sourcing.
This is a family business. We're third generation. My son is actually overseas in Southeast Asia at the moment, and he has been here 5 years. He got married 3 years ago. They're expecting their first child in December, and the government's trying to put us out of business.
Both United Legwear and Gold Medal International testified in Washington, D.C., hoping that the government would reconsider these tariff policies. Back over to you.
Thank you, Courtney Reagan. Yeah, we sometimes forget. We think Walmart's already put everyone out of business, but they haven't. And we need to take this into account, I think. Thank you for that report. All right, thanks.
Okay, coming up, a lot more on Squawk Box this morning. Big story on Wall Street when we return, trimming the fat at Goldman Sachs. There's a new report out saying the bank is culling its upper ranks. The partnership, we're going to tell you what's behind that move right after the break. And as we head to a break, a quick look at yesterday's S&P 500 winners and
feel-good car buying from findandfundmycar.com is the place where you can find quality used cars from trusted dealers rated by you, and where you can fund your car with finance to fit your budget. It's feel-good car buying, all in one place.
Carry on, choose findandfundmycar.com.
Moving from one rental home to another is so expensive.
Last time, we had to pay hundreds to move in, the first month's rent.
And then a big deposit. With Romans, it doesn't have to be like this. It doesn't. At Romans, you really can move in from just £36, plus your first month's rent.
And that's it.
Nothing more to add. Move in from just £36, plus your first month's rent. With Romans.
No deposit.
No problem.
Romans, your trusted local property experts at romans.co.uk. Conditions and monthly fee apply.
At Tesco, we can pop our pasta in your Astra, our red Leicester in your Fiesta, or our mayo in your Mondeo. All you need to do is try click and collect. Just go to tesco.com, order your shopping, then click and collect. With the minimum basket spend now only £25. And if you fancy something a little more exotic, we can even put our pad thai in your Qashqai. Try click and collect at tesco.com. Every little helps. Selected larger stores. Booking charge may apply. See online for full terms and conditions.
This one shouldn't take long. Of course, if it had a cover, I might not be bothered. Can't see what's under there. And then they'd have chained the back wheel. It would have taken me much longer, especially if the chain's off the ground. Makes it harder to cut. This one doesn't even have a lock on the front. So, in the time I've been talking to you, I've nicked it.
Over 9,000 scooters and motorbikes were stolen in London last year. Lock your bike, chain the rear wheel, and cover it to make it harder to steal. Lock, chain, cover. The Met Police.
Did someone say winter sun? It's that time again. And this year at Jet2 Holidays, we're saying Cyprus. On this incredible island, you get it all. A choice of 4- and 5-star hotels, amazing ancient ruins for culture-packed days out, hiking and cycling trails for active adventures, and plenty of blue flag beaches for soaking up that winter sun. Book Cyprus now with just a £60 deposit. Jet2 Holidays. Package holidays you can trust. APRA net or protected, subject to availability and conditions.
Welcome back. You're watching Squawk Box, live from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square.
Good morning, everybody. We've been watching the U.S. equity futures at this hour. They actually jumped on word that the U.S. and China are expected to hold trade talks next month. Check it out. Right now, the Dow futures indicated up by 264 points. That comes after a gain of more than 230 points yesterday. So you are looking at the markets being up for the week, potentially, if we were to close at the levels we're looking at right now, or even open at them. S&P 500 up by about 27 points. The NASDAQ up by 94.
A new report out from the Wall Street Journal says that Goldman Sachs' partnership may be shrinking. According to the article, at least a dozen Goldman partners may be announcing their departures in the coming weeks. Joining us to talk about what this means for the banking giant, Bethany McLean. She is Vanity Fair contributing editor, host of the podcast Making a Killing. She's also a CNBC contributor. I guess I should still, when I hear Goldman partners, I should still think, whoa, wow. But ever since they changed from a partnership to publicly traded entity, I really haven't felt the same way about what it would mean to be a partner.
Well, Goldman. There's that. Then there's the financial crisis, right, and the transition to being a bank, and it's not the same firm anymore. Yeah. If you think of the storied Goldman Sachs, it was a trading powerhouse, and that business has never come back since the financial crisis. And now Goldman's trying to remake itself as a consumer and mid-tier corporate lender, which sounds just like everybody else, right?
I mean, a partner used to mean if you were there before and then it converted, it used to mean you had $100 million, did it not? Or that's what I used to sort of think. It close. If you were there during the IPO. So that's what and that's why I still think we go, ooh, Goldman partner, but it's.
Well, I think by culling the partnership ranks, they're trying to bring back some of that mystique to the partnership,
really?
Right? I think that's part of the goal.
You think it's a culture thing, or do you think it's we just got to trim all of these expensive older people?
I think it's both that and it's a culture thing. It's an attempt to spin it as a culture thing by making it look like this is something you can aspire to again. But it's not the same firm. I think those days are done.
That's the big question. Then
Your
what is the firm?
your take is that David Solomon came in and went, wow. I
think
can make a lot more money if I don't have all
I think
this.
that there's a margin issue,
Loaded.
and I think you have a lot of very. But I also think there's probably like an age discrimination suit waiting to happen here because
are all these guys leaving? Really? Or are they just high paid, or are they?
Well, no, but by the way, it used to be that you would retire, you would leave Goldman Sachs when you were like 45 years old, 50 years old.
That was part of the allure, right? Like work really hard and then have a lot of money.
That's part of the problem. You make less money and now you want to stick around because there isn't any place else to go anymore. But to me, the biggest change at Goldman is just summed up by the old trading business. Goldman was the house, right? And that was incredibly powerful. And
the house, as in the casino.
As in the casino, right? And in these new businesses they're pushing into, they're just one of many with no real advantages. And so just think about that and what a drastic transformation that is for the firm.
Although it does create more stability, right? If you're a big trading powerhouse and you have a bad quarter or a bad year or the market goes bad and you're not on the right side of things, there's a lot of volatility that can come with that too.
But there was another great Wall Street Journal piece recently on how indebted the middle class is. And as you look at firms like Goldman pushing into lending to people, you just wonder, without a credit culture of managing those losses, without a culture of lending to people, right?
Yeah. To know historically what happens.
What do you think? I mean, the folks that are leaving Goldman Sachs currently in this new